Leo's head throbbed with the ghostly afterimages of differential equations and quantum mechanics. The numbers swam behind his eyelids even when he closed them, a relentless tide of partial derivatives and wave functions that refused to be tamed. His dorm room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. 3 empty mugs lined his desk like tombstones marking the hours he'd spent preparing for his physics finals. Outside, the campus was quiet, the kind of deep midnight silence that felt more like a vacuum than peace. He rubbed his temples, the pressure building behind his eyes. He needed something, anything, to break the cycle. His phone lay face down on the textbook-strewn desk, a black rectangle of potential distraction. With a sigh that felt like it came from the soles of his feet, he picked it up, thumb unlocking the screen with practiced ease. The App Store icon glowed invitingly. Something mindless, he thought. Something that doesn't involve calculating the gravitational constant or remembering Maxwell's equations. Scrolling through recommendations, his bleary eyes caught a colorful icon, a stylized hand reaching down from clouds toward a tiny medieval village. Deus Ex Machina, the title read. A cozy god simulator. Relax and shape a world at your fingertips. The description promised no combat, no complex resource management, just gentle world building. Perfect. His finger tapped install before he could overthink it. The download bar filled quickly. When the app opened, it presented a minimalist interface, a soft blue background with a single floating island rendered in charming pixel art. The island held a village of maybe 24 buildings clustered around a dry central well. Tiny villagers moved between structures with slow, deliberate animations. Leo zoomed in. The art style was deceptively simple, each villager had distinct clothing, a hunched posture that spoke of exhaustion. The ground around the village was cracked and parched, the fields barren. A notification bubble popped up, Village of Oakhaven suffers from severe drought. Divine intervention recommended. Leo smiled faintly. This was exactly what he needed. No stakes, no consequences, just a digital sandbox to play in while his brain recovered from the onslaught of real physics. He explored the interface. In the bottom right corner floated a tool called the Reality Editor, represented by a quill crossing a gear. Tapping it opened a new screen with sliders and variables labeled in clean, sans serif typeface. Atmospheric pressure, humidity percentage, condensation nuclei density. Next to each variable, a small energy cost displayed in glowing blue numbers, divine energy, 100/100. His physics-trained mind immediately recognized the setup. This wasn't just magic, it was simulating actual meteorological processes. The app was letting him manipulate the underlying conditions for rain formation. A pleasant surprise for someone who just spent 6 hours studying fluid dynamics. He dragged his finger across the screen, pulling a cloud icon from a palette on the left toward the village. As he did, the reality editor automatically adjusted variables, atmospheric pressure decreased slightly over Oakhaven, humidity spiked, condensation nuclei scattered through the air column. The divine energy counter ticked down, 98/100. On the screen, pixelated clouds gathered over the village. Not the sudden, magical appearance he'd expected from a god game, but a gradual accumulation that followed proper atmospheric physics. Warm air rose, cooled, condensed around the nuclei he'd introduced. The first raindrop fell, a single white pixel against the brown landscape. Then another. Then a shower. The animation was surprisingly detailed, raindrops splashed in the dust, forming tiny puddles that spread and connected. The villagers below stopped their slow trudging. One by one, they looked up, their pixelated faces turning toward the sky. A little animation played above each, a smiley face emoji. Leo watched, genuinely pleased. There was something satisfying about seeing cause and effect work so cleanly, even in a simplified game world. The dry ground darkened as water seeped into cracks. The central well, which had shown an empty bucket icon, now displayed water slowly filling it. A completion chime sounded, and a notification appeared, quest complete, bring rain to Oakhaven. Divine energy +5. New villagers will arrive tomorrow. His energy counter now read 103/100, he'd gained a small bonus. He leaned back in his chair, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in hours. This was perfect. He could already imagine playing this during study breaks, slowly building up the village, maybe introducing simple machines next. The app even had a suggested edit section that showed icons for lever, pulley, and inclined plane grayed out until he reached certain milestones. A cozy, progressive experience. He saved his game, closed the app, and finally felt ready to sleep. As he lay in bed, his last conscious thought was about whether he should adjust the orbital parameters tomorrow. The village had a moon that seemed slightly off in its elliptical path. Meanwhile, in a world that was not a simulation, rain fell on the real Oakhaven. Aquaria felt it first as a wrongness in her divine essence. She stood in her temple, a structure of living coral and flowing water that existed both in the material realm and slightly adjacent to it. For 3 centuries, she had maintained the hydrological balance of this region. The drought had been intentional, a lesson to the mortals about proper reverence, a controlled scarcity that would culminate in a grand ceremony where she would release the rains amid their prayers. The magic was already woven, spells of holding kept the clouds at bay, divine energy maintained the atmospheric stasis. Then the pressure changed. Not through prayer. Not through ritual sacrifice. Not even through another deity's interference. It shifted according to rules she didn't recognize, cold, impersonal laws that bypassed her divine authority entirely. The humidity spiked without her permission. Condensation formed around particles that hadn't been blessed. The rain fell not as a gift from her, but as a consequence. A physical inevitability. She reached out with her senses, the water in the temple rippling with her agitation. The rainfall was perfect. Too perfect. It followed optimal distribution patterns, maximized absorption, minimized runoff. It was efficient in a way nature never was. Nature had artistry, randomness, the touch of the divine. This was clinical. Mathematical. Worse, she felt her power wane. Not dramatically, but noticeably, like a musician hearing a single note go flat in a symphony. The spells she'd woven to control the weather unraveled at the edges, their magical structure disrupted by this new physics. The word came to her unbidden, though she didn't fully comprehend it. All she knew was that something had overwritten her domain without asking, without even acknowledging her existence. Her eyes, the color of deep ocean trenches, narrowed. She extended her awareness beyond the temple, beyond the village, probing the layers of reality. There, a faint, unfamiliar signature. Not divine, not arcane, not even elemental. It was like nothing she'd ever encountered, a presence that treated the fundamental laws of the world as variables to be adjusted. It had touched her domain casually, thoughtlessly, like a child poking a complex machine. Aquaria's form solidified from flowing water into a woman of liquid crystal, her expression hardening. This was no natural phenomenon. This was intervention. And whoever, or whatever, had done it hadn't just brought rain. It had introduced a crack in the foundation of how her world worked. She would find this force. She would understand it. And then, she would make it understand the price of touching a goddess's domain. The rain continued to fall on Oakhaven, gentle and life-giving. The villagers celebrated, offering spontaneous prayers of thanks to Aquaria, unaware that their goddess was not the source. Unaware that their salvation had come from a tired physics student in another reality, who was already asleep and dreaming of orbital mechanics. In the temple, Aquaria began her investigation. The first anomaly had occurred. The first thread had been pulled. And the tapestry of magic that covered this world had begun, ever so slightly, to unravel. The rain that fell upon Oakhaven was wrong. Aquaria, goddess of rivers, springs, and all flowing waters, stood at the edge of the village square where puddles gathered in the mud. Her divine form shimmered like sunlight on a deep lake, visible only to those with magical sight. She extended a hand, letting droplets pass through her translucent fingers. No blessing. No prayer answered. No trace of her own essence woven into the water's descent. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice the sound of distant rapids. Around her, the village priests of her order moved in frantic patterns. Old Brother Kalen, his blue robe soaked through, knelt by the newly formed puddle outside the shrine. His hands trembled as he performed the ritual of recognition, chanting the ancient words that should have made the water glow with Aquaria's sigil. Nothing happened. The water remained ordinary, stubbornly physical. "Goddess," Kalen called out, his voice cracking. "The rain answers to no one. It falls as if it simply decided to fall." Aquaria's attention shifted to the villagers. They weren't celebrating the end of the drought as they should have been. Instead, they huddled in doorways, pointing at the sky with expressions of confusion rather than gratitude. A young mother pulled her child inside, whispering about bad omens when the boy tried to catch raindrops on his tongue. "This violates the natural order," Aquaria said, more to herself than to her priests. "Rain comes from clouds blessed by my hand, drawn by prayers, shaped by hydrological spells. This." She gestured at the falling water. "This is just condensation. The word felt alien even as she formed it. Condensation was a scholar's term, something from dusty scrolls about natural philosophy, theoretical nonsense that no proper mage took seriously. Yet here it was, manifesting without magic, without divine intervention. Her investigation took her through the village. At the well, she found the water level rising normally, but the connection to her domain felt thin, stretched. At the stream that fed Oakhaven's mill, she watched as fish swam in confused circles, their instinctive magical senses disrupted. Everywhere she looked, the world obeyed different rules, rules that excluded her. Anger, cold and deep as ocean trenches, stirred within her. This wasn't just an anomaly. This was an invasion. Someone or something was rewriting the laws of water itself, carving out a piece of her domain and replacing it with what? Physics. The thought was absurd, yet the evidence dripped from every roof. She gathered her power, forming a probe of pure divine energy, a shimmering sphere of liquid light that contained her consciousness extended. With a thought, she sent it upward, following the rain's path backward through the atmosphere, searching for the source of this violation. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Leo yawned, stretching in his dorm room chair. On his phone screen, Oakhaven looked peaceful now. The rain had stopped, and little +5 divine energy notification floated in the corner. He'd helped a village, earned some points, standard god simulator stuff. But now what? He swiped through the app's menus. Deus Ex Machina had surprisingly detailed tools for a casual game. There was the reality editor he'd used for the rain, but also sections labeled Physics Tweaks, Material Properties, Orbital Mechanics. He tapped Physics Tweaks. The screen changed to show the village from a top-down view, with various sliders and dials floating around it. Local gravity constant, read 1. Atmospheric friction, read another. Electromagnetic permeability. Leo chuckled. They really went all out on the science stuff. He remembered his physics professor droning on about gravitational constants last week. 9.8 meters per second squared on Earth's surface, the man had said, but imagine if it were just a little different. Leo's finger hovered over the gravity slider. The game showed his current divine energy, 105 out of some maximum he hadn't discovered yet. The slider had a cost indicator, adjusting gravity would cost 15 energy. More than the rain had cost, but he had plenty. What the hell, he muttered. Let's see what happens. He dragged the slider just slightly, reducing the local gravity constant by about 2%. The energy counter ticked down to 90. On screen, nothing seemed to change at first. Then, slowly, things began to float. Not everything. Just small objects, a bucket left outside a hut, a handful of pebbles on the path, a child's wooden toy. They drifted upward lazily, as if submerged in water rather than air. Leo watched, fascinated, as the bucket rose about 3 feet off the ground, spinning slowly. The pebbles formed a lazy cloud. The toy duck bobbed like it was on an invisible string. Cool effect, Leo said, taking a sip of his energy drink. The devs really nailed the physics engine. He didn't notice the tiny counter in the corner that tracked reality stability, dropping from 98% to 96%. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. In Oakhaven, the floating objects caused immediate panic. Brother Kalen was the first to notice. He had just finished another failed ritual when the wooden bucket he'd used for holy water preparation drifted past his face. He stared, blinked, then screamed, a proper, undignified shriek that brought other priests running. By the flowing rivers, one of them cried as pebbles lifted from the path to dance around their heads. Children pointed and laughed until their parents dragged them inside. The village elder, a woman named Marta with 70 winters behind her, emerged from her home to see her prized copper kettle floating serenely above her herb garden. She didn't scream. She just watched, her face pale, and whispered, "The world is coming undone." Aquaria felt it immediately. Her divine probe, still tracing the rain's origin, suddenly encountered a new distortion, a bending of the very fabric of reality that had nothing to do with magic. Gravity, that fundamental force that even gods obeyed, was being adjusted. Like someone turning a dial. She recalled the probe, the sphere of liquid light returning to hover before her. Within it, she saw not magical signatures, but equations. Numbers. Variables. The probe had captured the shape of the anomaly, a precise, mathematical alteration of physical laws. This is no rival deity, she said, her voice trembling with realization. This is something else entirely. The floating objects began to settle as Leo, bored again, closed the physics tweaks menu. He'd spent his divine energy, seen the neat effect, and now wanted to check if there were any new quests. The bucket dropped with a thud. The pebbles pattered to the ground. The toy duck landed softly in the mud. But the damage was done. Aquaria's priests were now openly weeping, certain their goddess had abandoned them or that some great curse had fallen upon Oakhaven. The villagers barred their doors. And Aquaria herself stood in the center of it all, her probe hovering before her, showing her the impossible truth. The probe had traced the signal back. Not to another plane, not to a rival god's domain, but to somewhere else. A place that shouldn't exist. A realm with no magic, no divine energy, just cold, hard laws of physics that someone was using like tools. And the signal was still there. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. A non-magical presence making changes to reality itself. Aquaria made her decision. She couldn't handle this alone. Whatever this was, it threatened not just her domain, but the entire magical foundation of existence. She reached out with her divine consciousness, sending a message along the celestial pathways that connected the pantheon. To the star gods who watched the heavens. To the earth mother who shaped the land. To the flame lord who commanded fire. She sent them all the same image, her probe's recording of the gravity adjustment, the mathematical intrusion, the signal from beyond. Brothers and sisters, her message whispered across the divine network. Something has broken into our world. It doesn't use magic. It uses science. And it's changing everything. Far above, in constellations that only gods could see, eyes opened. The star gods, ancient and distant, felt their astrological magic shudder as the gravity adjustments subtly altered orbital calculations that hadn't changed in eons. They turned their attention downward, toward the small village of Oakhaven and the strange signal Aquaria had found. One of them, a deity who took the form of a nebula with countless swirling stars, sent back a single word that echoed through the divine realms. Investigate. Aquaria nodded, her form solidifying with purpose. She would find this god of physics, this invader from a realm of equations. And she would make it stop. Whatever the cost. Leo stretched his arms above his head, the joints in his shoulders popping with satisfying cracks. The glow of his phone screen cast pale blue light across his cramped dorm room desk, illuminating physics textbooks stacked haphazardly beside empty energy drink cans. He'd just finished another grueling problem set on quantum mechanics, and his brain felt like overcooked spaghetti, limp and useless. His eyes drifted to the Deus Ex Machina icon on his phone's home screen, the stylized gear and cloud symbol promising exactly what he needed, mindless relaxation. He tapped the icon, and the app loaded with its familiar soothing chime. The screen transitioned smoothly to an aerial view of Oakhaven, the medieval village he'd been tinkering with. The rain he'd created 2 days ago had left the landscape greener, with puddles still glistening in the morning sun that streamed through pixel-perfect clouds. Little villagers moved about their routines, farmers tending fields, children chasing chickens, blacksmiths hammering at forges. Leo zoomed in on a group struggling with a large stone block near what appeared to be a half-built well. 3 burly men strained against ropes, muscles bulging as they tried to shift the stone a few inches. Their progress was painfully slow. Ugh, that looks inefficient, Leo muttered to himself, rubbing his tired eyes. All that wasted human energy. A notification popped up in the corner of the screen, village efficiency rating, 42/100, significant room for improvement. Below it, a new tool icon had appeared, a stylized light bulb labeled Invention Sketchpad. Leo tapped it, and the interface shifted to a blank canvas with various drawing tools. The app helpfully displayed, sketch mechanical improvements to boost village productivity. Each implementation costs divine energy based on complexity. Leo grinned. This was exactly the kind of puzzle his physics-trained mind enjoyed, optimizing systems for maximum output with minimal input. He selected the pencil tool and began sketching. First, a simple lever, a long wooden beam with a fulcrum placed strategically beneath it. He added annotations in his neat handwriting, mechanical advantage equals effort arm/load arm. Place fulcrum closer to load for greater force multiplication. The app calculated the cost, 5 divine energy. Leo had 90 DE remaining from his gravity tweak yesterday. He confirmed the implementation. On screen, near the struggling villagers, the ground shimmered. A sturdy oak log materialized from nothingness, followed by a large flat stone that settled perfectly as a fulcrum. The villagers jumped back in alarm, pointing and shouting soundlessly through Leo's speakers. After a moment of hesitation, one brave soul, a young man with a leather apron, approached the new apparatus. He experimentally placed the stone block on one end of the log, then pushed down on the other. The block lifted with startling ease. The man's face broke into a wide grin, and soon his companions were clustering around, testing the lever with growing excitement. Leo felt a warm satisfaction. See? Basic physics makes everything better. He moved on to the village's water collection system. The current setup involved women carrying heavy clay jars from the river up a steep embankment. Leo sketched a simple pulley system, a wheel mounted on a frame, with a rope running through it and a hook for attaching containers. He added a counterweight system for even easier lifting. 8 divine energy. He confirmed. Again, reality shimmered. A wooden frame with a beautifully crafted wheel appeared at the riverbank, complete with hemp rope and iron hooks. The village women stared, then cautiously approached. One placed her water jar on the hook, pulled the rope, and watched in amazement as the jar rose smoothly with minimal effort. She turned to her companions, her mouth forming words Leo couldn't hear but whose meaning was clear: "This changes everything." Leo spent the next hour sketching various improvements. An inclined plane for moving barrels into storage cellars. A basic gear system for the village mill, replacing the current donkey-powered mechanism. A series of connected levers for the blacksmith's bellows. Each implementation cost between 3 and 12 divine energy, and his reserves steadily dropped: 90. 82, 73. 64, 52. He was so engrossed in the optimization challenge that he barely noticed the numbers. In Oakhaven, the changes were spreading like ripples in a pond. The lever team had moved the stone block to the well site in minutes instead of hours. The pulley system had a line of women waiting to use it, their backs already feeling relief from the absence of strain. At the mill, the new gears turned with satisfying precision, grinding grain faster than ever before. The blacksmith's apprentice pumped the improved bellows with one hand while shaping metal with the other, his productivity doubling. But elsewhere in the village, confusion was turning to alarm. In a small stone hut at Oakhaven's edge, Master Torin, the village's only practicing mage, was attempting his daily strengthening ritual. A farmer had brought him a worn plowshare, requesting an enchantment to make it cut through tough soil more easily. Torin was a minor mage, his abilities limited to simple utility spells passed down through 3 generations. He placed his hands on the cold iron, closed his eyes, and began chanting the ancient words that called upon the magical currents to reinforce the metal structure. Nothing happened. He tried again, focusing harder. The familiar tingle of magic should have been gathering at his fingertips, but instead he felt nothing. A cold emptiness. The magical currents that had flowed through Oakhaven for centuries seemed thin, diluted, as if someone had opened a valve and let them drain away. "That's impossible," Torin muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. He attempted a different spell, a simple light cantrip. A faint glow appeared at his fingertips, but it flickered and died like a guttering candle. By the gods! He wasn't the only one. Throughout the region, mages who specialized in strength enhancements, durability spells, and force manipulations found their magic faltering. A carpenter in the next town over tried to magically reinforce a roof beam and watched in horror as the spell dissipated like smoke. A guard captain attempting to enchant his soldier's armor found the magic sliding off the metal like water off oil. The failure wasn't complete, other types of magic still functioned, but anything that manipulated physical force was becoming unreliable. Back in his dorm, Leo received a notification: world efficiency increased. Oakhaven productivity plus 38%. Divine energy reward, plus 15. His energy pool jumped from 52 to 67. Nice, he said aloud, leaning back in his chair. The game was giving him exactly what he needed, a sense of accomplishment without any real stress. He watched as little +1 efficiency notifications popped up across the village map like digital confetti. What he couldn't see were the panicked conversations happening in the magical community. Messages flew via enchanted birds and scrying pools. Local mages gathered in worried clusters, comparing notes about the strange weakening of force-related magic. The consensus was clear: something was overriding the fundamental laws that governed physical interactions in their world, and it was happening with cold, mathematical precision. 3 days after Leo's efficiency update, a group arrived at Oakhaven's outskirts. They came not by road but through a shimmering portal that tore the air with a sound like tearing silk. First through was a woman who appeared to be in her late 40s, though her eyes held centuries of knowledge. She wore robes of deep blue embroidered with silver constellations that seemed to shift and move. This was Alara, archmage and sage of the Northern Spire. Behind her followed 4 other mages, 2 men and 2 women, all wearing variations of scholarly robes and carrying staffs of different woods and crystals. Marta, the village elder, hurried to meet them, her face pale. "Archmage Elara," she said, bowing deeply. "We didn't expect." "Show me these improvements," Elara interrupted, her voice calm but carrying an edge like honed steel. Marta led them through the village. Elara's sharp eyes took in everything, the lever system at the well site, the pulley by the river, the new gears at the mill. She didn't touch any of them. Instead, she extended her senses, reaching out with magical awareness refined over 300 years of study. What she felt made her blood run cold. There was no magic in these devices. None at all. But more disturbing was what surrounded them, a kind of mathematical certainty. The levers operated with perfect mechanical advantage. The pulleys distributed weight with flawless efficiency. The gears meshed with zero tolerance. In a world where magic always introduced slight variables, where enchantments wore off, where spells required maintenance, these devices worked with chilling perfection. They didn't just function, they defined function. Who made these? Elara asked, though she already knew the answer wouldn't be satisfying. They appeared, Marta said helplessly. After the strange rain, and the floating objects, things just materialize now and then. Elara walked to the lever system. She placed a hand near the oak beam without touching it. Her magical senses recoiled. The area around the device felt dead. Not just devoid of magic, but actively resistant to it. As if the very concept of magic was being pushed aside by something older, more fundamental, and utterly indifferent. "It's not a person," she said softly, more to herself than to her companions. "Not a mage, not a god. It's a force. A principle." One of her junior mages, a young man named Corin, stepped forward. "Archmage, we've analyzed the magical decay patterns. The weakening is most pronounced around these mechanical devices. It's as if they're teaching reality to work differently." "Teaching?" Elara's eyes narrowed. "No. Not teaching. Dictating." She looked up at the sky, though her gaze seemed to pierce through it, searching for something beyond the clouds, beyond the stars, beyond the divine realms. "There's an intelligence behind this," she said. "But it doesn't think like we do. It doesn't want, it doesn't desire, it doesn't worship. It calculates. It optimizes." Her hand went to the amulet at her throat, a crystal containing centuries of magical knowledge. For the first time in her long life, she felt true fear. Not fear of power, but fear of something that might not even recognize power as a concept. Something that saw their world as a set of variables to be adjusted for maximum efficiency. "We need to find the source," she said, turning to her team. "Before it optimizes us out of existence." As she spoke, unbeknownst to her, Leo was yawning and closing the Deus Ex Machina app. He had an early class tomorrow, Introduction to Thermodynamics. The game had been fun, but real physics awaited. He plugged in his phone, turned off the light, and fell asleep dreaming of levers and pulleys. In Oakhaven, Elara stood in the gathering dusk, watching villagers use the pulley system to lift water with effortless grace. They were adapting quickly to this new reality. Too quickly. And that, she realized, might be the most terrifying thing of all. Leo stretched his arms above his head, the glow of his phone screen casting pale blue light across his cramped dorm room. Physics textbooks lay scattered around him like fallen soldiers from a week of relentless studying. His eyes felt gritty, his mind still humming with equations about fluid dynamics and quantum mechanics. He needed a break, something mindless, something satisfying. He tapped the familiar icon of Deus Ex Machina, the God Simulator app that had become his guilty pleasure. The screen loaded with its cozy, pixel art aesthetic, showing the medieval village of Oakhaven from a god's eye view. The villagers moved about their daily routines, tiny figures hauling water with the simple pulley systems he'd introduced last time. A small notification blinked in the corner, village efficiency plus 23%. Divine energy reward, plus 15 DE. His energy pool now read 67 DE, not bad for a casual player. But something caught his eye as he zoomed out to admire the game's skybox. The celestial mechanics, usually a charming backdrop of twinkling stars and orbiting planets, showed a minor inconsistency. One of the smaller planets, a reddish dot labeled Paralis in the game's lore, had an elliptical orbit that was slightly off. Its perihelion was too close to its primary star, and the orbital velocity didn't match the gravitational constant he'd calculated from the game's physics engine. That's sloppy programming, Leo thought, a physics major's irritation bubbling up. Orbital mechanics should be precise. He tapped the planet, and the reality editor tool opened automatically. The interface displayed variables he could manipulate: gravitational constant, local, orbital velocity, eccentricity, axial tilt, and tidal forces. Each had a divine energy cost next to it. Adjusting the gravitational constant would be expensive, 40 DE at least, but tweaking the orbital velocity and eccentricity together might fix the issue for less. Leo chewed his lower lip, considering. This was just a game, after all. A relaxing distraction. But the imperfection nagged at him like an unsolved equation. With a shrug, he selected orbital velocity and eccentricity, dragging sliders with his thumb. He increased the velocity by 0.3% to account for the gravitational pull, then reduced the orbital eccentricity from 0.12 to 0.08, smoothing out the ellipse. The cost flashed, 28 divine energy. That's almost half my pool, he thought, hesitating. But the satisfaction of fixing something, of imposing order on chaos, was too tempting. He confirmed the edit. The screen shimmered, the planet Paralis adjusting its path with a smooth, mathematical precision. A new notification appeared: orbital correction complete. Celestial harmony plus 5%. Divine energy, 39 DE. Leo smiled, leaning back in his chair. The skybox looked better now, more correct. He didn't notice the subtle drain on his energy reserves, nor the way the app's interface flickered for a fraction of a second as if straining under some unseen load. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. In the real world, the world of magic and gods that Leo didn't know existed, the consequences unfolded with silent, cosmic violence. High above the material plane, in the celestial spheres where the star gods dwelled, the shift was immediate. Paralis, the Red Wanderer, was not a mere pixel in a game but a living celestial body whose orbit governed astrological magic across 100 kingdoms. Its path had been set by divine decree at the dawn of creation, a perfect expression of celestial harmony that powered spells of prophecy, navigation, and fate-weaving. When Leo adjusted its velocity and eccentricity, the change propagated through reality like a stone dropped in a still pond. The planet's new trajectory was fractionally different, a deviation of arcseconds in the grand scale of the cosmos, but in a universe where magic relied on precise alignments, it was catastrophic. Across the world, astrologers preparing for the annual Convergence Festival felt their scrying mirrors crack. Star charts, painstakingly calibrated over centuries, suddenly showed Paralis out of position. Navigational spells used by sea captains to cross treacherous waters fizzled, their magical bearings skewed by the shifted celestial reference point. In the grand observatory of the Astral Academy, a crystal orb used to predict harvest seasons shattered, spraying shards across marble floors. In Oakhaven, the effects were more subtle but no less disturbing. Master Torin, the local mage, was attempting to cast a simple light spell using the evening star's alignment when the magic sputtered and died. The runes he'd drawn in the air dissolved into meaningless sparks. He stared at his hands, then at the sky, where Paralis now hung in a position that shouldn't be possible for another 3 days. A cold dread settled in his stomach. This wasn't like the failed reinforcement spell from the lever incident. This was bigger, older magic going wrong. It's in the stars now, he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Archmage Elara felt the disturbance before she saw it. She stood in the temporary command center her team had established just outside Oakhaven, a warded tent filled with scrying pools, resonance crystals, and parchment maps covered in annotations. The air hummed with latent magic, but now a new frequency vibrated through it, a cold, mathematical precision that made her teeth ache. Archmage Corin, her junior mage, burst into the tent, his robes disheveled. The celestial alignments, they're shifting. Paralis has moved off its predicted path by 0.3 arc-minutes. Elara didn't need the confirmation. She could feel it in her bones, in the way the weave of magic around her strained against some invisible force. She moved to the central scrying pool, her fingers tracing sigils in the air. The water shimmered, showing not Oakhaven but the celestial spheres, a visualization of the magical energies that bound the cosmos. Paralis glowed with an angry red light, its new trajectory a stark, straight line compared to the graceful curve of the other planets. This is no natural phenomenon, Elara said, her voice tight. This is calculated. Deliberate. She thought back to the reports from Aquaria, the water goddess. The rain with no magical signature. The gravity fluctuations. The simple machines that overrode enchantments. And now this, a celestial body moved with impossible precision. Whatever was doing this wasn't using magic. It was using something else. Something that treated reality like a set of equations to be solved. Gather the team, she ordered Corin. We need to perform a deep resonance ritual. If this force is manipulating celestial mechanics, it must be leaving traces in the fabric of reality. We'll find its source. Corin nodded, his young face pale. What if it's a god? A new one? No god works like this, Elara said, her eyes never leaving the scrying pool. Gods create. They inspire. They work through faith and domain. This optimizes. It corrects. It has no reverence for what already exists. As her mages prepared the ritual, lighting incense, chanting in the old tongue, aligning crystals to capture the anomalous frequencies, Elara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. They were hunting something that didn't play by their rules. Something that saw their world as a system to be debugged. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. In the highest reaches of the celestial spheres, where reality frayed into pure concept, the star gods convened. Their council chamber was not a room but a confluence of light and thought, a place where deities manifested as constellations given voice. Aquaria was there too, summoned from her watery domain. She appeared as a woman woven from river currents and ocean depths, her expression grim. Paralis has been moved, said Solarius, the sun god, his voice like a corona flare. Not by magic. Not by divine will. By equations. Equations? Aquaria's form rippled with disbelief. You mean the same force that disrupted my reigns? The same, confirmed Lunara, the moon goddess, her silver light flickering. We've traced the interference. It comes from beyond the veil, a place without magic, where reality follows only the laws of. She hesitated, the concept foreign even to a god. Of physics. The word hung in the celestial space, unfamiliar and threatening. Physics. Aquaria repeated. The study of mundane forces. Leverage. Gravity. And more, Solarius said. Orbital mechanics. Atmospheric pressure. This force manipulates them directly, overriding our domains. My priests report that solar invocation spells are failing when this, physics, interferes with the angle of sunlight. A murmur passed through the assembled gods, constellations shifting uneasily in the void. We must act together, Aquaria said, her voice firming with resolve. This is not just about water or stars anymore. This force treats our entire reality as something to be corrected. Optimized. It has no respect for the balance we've maintained for eons. Solarius nodded, his light intensifying. Agreed. We will combine our powers. Aquaria, you have traced its emanations closest to the material plane. We will amplify your probe, send it through the veil with the full might of the celestial pantheon behind it. And when we find its source? Aquaria asked. We destroy it, Lunara said, her light turning cold. Before it destroys us. The decision made, the star gods began to weave their power together, a tapestry of starlight and divine will, aimed at piercing the barrier between worlds. Aquaria added her own essence, the flow of rivers and the depth of oceans merging with celestial fire. In the command tent outside Oakhaven, Elara felt the buildup of divine energy like a pressure change before a storm. Her ritual was nearly complete, the crystals glowed with captured data, the scrying pool showing faint traces of the anomalous signal leading away from their world, into a place her magic could barely comprehend. We're close, she whispered, not knowing that far above her, gods were preparing to follow the same trail. And in his dorm room, Leo yawned, put his phone on the charger, and went to bed, completely unaware that he'd just sparked a celestial war. Leo slumped back in his worn desk chair, the blue light of his phone screen casting a pale glow across his tired face. His physics textbook lay open to a chapter on thermodynamics, but his eyes kept drifting to the clock, 2:47 a.m. Another all-nighter. The equations blurred together, and he rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar pressure building behind his eyes. He needed a break. Something mindless. Something that didn't involve calculating fluid dynamics or solving partial differential equations. His thumb found the familiar icon on his phone's home screen, Deus Ex Machina, the god simulator he'd been playing for weeks. The app loaded with its usual soothing chime, displaying the medieval village of Oakhaven in miniature. From his god's eye view, he could see tiny villagers moving about their daily routines, the simple machines he'd introduced, levers, pulleys, gears, making their work easier. A satisfaction notification blinked, village productivity increased by 18%. Divine energy reward, plus 15 DE. His current divine energy read 67. Not bad, he thought. Enough for some creative tinkering. Leo scrolled through the app's tools. The reality editor showed various physics variables he could adjust: gravity constants, atmospheric pressure, thermal conductivity. The invention sketchpad offered templates for simple machines. But today, his mind wandered back to his morning history class, where the professor had discussed early firearms and their impact on medieval warfare. The concept fascinated him, the elegant simplicity of chemical energy converting to kinetic force. On a whim, he tapped the Design Lab option, a feature he hadn't explored much. The interface shifted to a blank canvas with drafting tools. Leo hesitated for a moment, then began sketching. His physics-trained mind worked through the problem systematically. First, the barrel, a simple metal tube to direct the projectile. He drew it with precise lines, considering the material properties. Iron would work, though steel would be better for containing pressure. The app's interface responded to his touch, offering material options that cost divine energy. He selected basic iron composition, spending 5 DE. Next, the firing mechanism. He remembered the flintlock design from his history lecture. A hammer holding a piece of flint, a steel frizzen, a pan for priming powder. He sketched each component, thinking through the physics. The flint striking steel would create sparks, igniting the priming powder, which would flash through a touch hole to ignite the main charge in the barrel. The gunpowder itself presented an interesting challenge. He needed to introduce the chemical reaction, potassium nitrate, charcoal, sulfur in the right proportions. The app's chemistry module allowed him to specify the mixture ratio. He set it at 75% saltpeter, 15% charcoal, 10% sulfur, spending another 8 DE to materialize the knowledge in the world. Finally, the projectile. A simple lead ball. He specified the diameter, mass, and the physics of expansion against the barrel's rifling, though he kept it smoothbore for simplicity. The app calculated the expected muzzle velocity based on powder charge and barrel length. Leo spent a total of 28 divine energy on the blueprint, reducing his total to 39 DE. The app confirmed, firearm design, flintlock musket. Complexity, intermediate. Materials required, iron, wood, chemical components. Impact on world, introduces ballistic physics principles. He tapped deploy blueprint without much thought. Just another game feature, he told himself. Something to help the villagers defend themselves maybe, or hunt more efficiently. The app showed the blueprint materializing in Oakhaven, appearing as rolled parchment in the village square. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. In Oakhaven, the morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone square. Marta, the village elder, was discussing the latest anomalies with Brother Kalen when a scroll of strange parchment materialized from thin air, landing with a soft thump at their feet. Both stared at it, then at each other. No magical signature. No divine aura. Just, there. Another one, Marta sighed, her voice weary. Like the rain that wasn't rain. The floating stones. The machines that work without enchantment. Brother Kalen picked up the scroll with trembling hands. This feels cold. Mathematical. As if written by something that doesn't breathe or pray. He unrolled it. Detailed diagrams covered the parchment, mechanical drawings of a device unlike anything in their world. Tubes, hammers, springs, measurements in precise numbers. Chemical formulas written in a notation that made his priestly mind ache. What in Aquaria's name? He whispered. Marta called for Alden, the village blacksmith. A burly man with forearms like tree trunks and soot permanently ground into his skin. Alden examined the drawings with a craftsman's eye. I can make this, he said after a long silence. The metalwork is simple enough. The wood carving for the stock, that's just carpentry. But these chemicals. He pointed to the gunpowder formula. I've never seen such markings. Can you decipher them? Marta asked. Alden shrugged. The measurements are clear. The symbols, they feel like alchemy, but not. There's no magic in these instructions. Just, proportions. Ratios. Over the next 3 days, Alden worked in his forge. The rhythmic clang of hammer on iron echoed through Oakhaven as he shaped the barrel. He followed the blueprint's measurements exactly, the bore diameter, the touch hole placement, the thickness of the metal. When he needed the chemical components, he found them waiting in his workshop, barrels of saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur that hadn't been there yesterday. Master Torin, the local mage, visited the forge on the second day. He watched Alden work, his brow furrowed. "This device troubles me," Torin said. "It has no enchantment. No runes. No connection to the magical currents. And yet." He trailed off, unable to articulate the unease crawling up his spine. "It's just metal and wood," Alden grunted, filing the frizzen to a precise angle. "That's what frightens me," Torin whispered. On the third day, Alden assembled the final components. The iron barrel fitted into the wooden stock. The lock mechanism, flint, hammer, spring, clicked into place with satisfying precision. He measured out the gunpowder according to the blueprint's instructions, poured it down the barrel, followed by a cloth-wrapped lead ball. He primed the pan with finer powder. A crowd had gathered outside the forge. Marta, Brother Kalen, Master Torin, and 24 villagers watched as Alden carried the finished firearm to the testing range, a cleared area where archers practiced. "Stand back," Alden warned, though he himself wasn't sure why. He raised the weapon, aimed at a straw target 50 paces away, and pulled the trigger. The flint struck the frizzen with a shower of sparks. The priming powder flashed with a sharp crack. A heartbeat later, the main charge ignited. The explosion was unlike anything Oakhaven had ever heard. Not the roar of dragonfire, not the crackle of lightning magic. This was sharper, drier, more mechanical. The musket kicked against Alden's shoulder with brutal force as smoke billowed from the barrel. The lead ball struck the straw target dead center, punching through with such velocity that it kept going, embedding itself in the oak tree behind it. Silence. Then chaos. Villagers screamed and scattered. Children cried. Marta stared, her face pale. Brother Kalen began praying to Aquaria, but the words felt hollow in his mouth. Master Torin approached the target, his hands trembling. He examined the hole in the straw, then walked to the oak tree. The lead ball had buried itself 2 inches into solid wood. He tried to cast a simple detection spell to analyze the impact, and felt nothing. The magic fizzled at his fingertips, as if repelled by the very physics of what had just occurred. "No enchantment," he whispered. "No magical energy. Just force. Pure, mathematical force." Asterisk asterisk asterisk. 20 miles away, in a clearing surrounded by ancient standing stones, Archmage Elara completed the deep resonance ritual. Her team of 4 mages, Corin and 3 others, stood at the cardinal points, their staves glowing with concentrated magical energy. For 3 days they had worked, tracing the source of the anomalies that were unraveling their world. The ritual circle hummed with power. Elara chanted the final incantations, her voice rising above the wind. She focused on the disruptions, the rain without magic, the floating objects, the failing spells, the orbital shift that had shattered prophecy orbs across the continent. "Show me the source," she commanded, pouring her will into the ritual. The magical energies coalesced into a shimmering sphere above the circle. Within it, images flashed, Oakhaven with its strange machines, the star charts showing Pyralis's altered orbit, the chemical formulas for gunpowder that had just materialized in Alden's workshop. And then the ritual locked onto something else. A nexus. A point in reality that was wrong. It didn't vibrate with magical frequencies. It hummed with cold equations. Mathematical constants. Physical laws operating with clinical precision. There, Elara breathed, her eyes widening. A pocket of pure physics. No magic. Just science. She could sense it now, a connection. A thin thread of causality linking the anomalies to this nexus. With a final surge of power, she followed that thread. The ritual sphere showed a location that made no sense. Not a place in their world. Not even in the celestial spheres. Between space. A reality adjacent to theirs, connected by something she couldn't comprehend. "Open a portal," she ordered Corin. The junior mage hesitated. "Archmage, we don't know what's on the other side. The energies are alien. Open it." Elara's voice cracked with fury. "Whatever is doing this must be stopped." Corin and the other mages combined their power. The air before Elara rippled, then tore. A shimmering portal opened, showing not a landscape, but a room. A strange room with flat surfaces, glowing rectangles, and a young man sitting in a chair, staring at a small device in his hand. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Leo was about to close the Deus Ex Machina app when his phone screen flickered. A notification popped up, anomalous energy signature detected. Reality integrity, 94%. He frowned. Weird bug. Then the app's interface glitched. The view of Oakhaven distorted, warping at the edges. And in the center of the screen, a portal swirled into existence. Not part of the game's graphics, this looked different. More real. And through that portal, a face appeared. A woman's face, furious and regal, with eyes that burned with magical energy. She was looking directly at him. Not at the village. Not at the game world. At him. Her lips moved, and though no sound came through, Leo could read the fury in the shape of the words, "What are you?" He dropped his phone. It clattered on the desk, the screen still showing that face, that impossible, furious face staring out of a game that was supposed to be relaxing. Staring at him. For the first time since downloading Deus Ex Machina, Leo felt a cold dread crawl up his spine. This wasn't a game bug. This wasn't clever programming. Something was very wrong. Leo's phone screen shimmered with an impossible light. The portal Archmage Elara had opened in the previous moments wasn't fading, it was widening, a vortex of sapphire and silver energy that swirled in the center of his display, warping the pixelated landscape of Oakhaven. Through it, he saw her face again, older than he'd first registered, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that burned with a fury no game NPC should possess. Then she stepped through. She emerged not as a sprite but as a full, three-dimensional figure, her robes of deep blue embroidered with silver constellations billowing in a wind that didn't exist in Leo's dorm room. Behind her, 4 other mages followed, Corin, the junior mage he'd glimpsed before, and 3 others whose faces were set in grim determination. They stood on what should have been digital grass, but their boots crunched against something real, and the air around them crackled with ozone and power. Leo blinked, his heart hammering against his ribs. This wasn't right. The graphics were too crisp, the details too vivid, the frayed edge of Elara's sleeve, the sweat beating on Corin's temple, the way the light from the portal cast long, wavering shadows across the ground. He could almost smell the magic, a scent like thunderstorms and old parchment. "Identify yourself, interloper." Elara's voice rang out, clear and commanding, though it came tinny through his phone speaker. "You have violated the sacred laws of this world. Your cold equations poison our magic. Show yourself." Leo stared, his fingers frozen above the screen. This had to be some next-level immersive event, the developers must have patched in a boss fight. He'd heard of games with AR elements that blurred reality, but this felt different. The panic in his chest was real, a cold knot tightening with each second. He glanced around his dorm room, textbooks piled on his desk, a half-empty energy drink, the faint hum of his laptop. Everything was normal. But on the screen, Elara raised a hand, and the air around her shimmered with gathering energy. "No response," she said, her tone dripping with contempt. "Then we shall extract the truth by force. Mages, bind this anomaly." The other mages moved in unison, their hands weaving intricate patterns in the air. Strands of golden light erupted from their fingertips, snaking toward the center of the screen where Leo's avatar, a vague, godlike presence, would be. The light wasn't like anything he'd seen in a game before, it pulsed with a life of its own, humming with a frequency that made his phone vibrate in his hand. Corin's face was taut with concentration, his lips moving in silent incantations. The golden strands coalesced into a net, aiming to ensnare whatever entity they perceived. Leo's mind raced. This was an attack. In the game, he had tools, the reality editor. He'd used it before to tweak gravity, to adjust atmospheric pressure. But this was direct combat. His thumb hovered over the app's interface, where the reality editor icon glowed softly. The divine energy counter in the corner read 39 DE, a number he'd depleted with his earlier edits. He had to act. If this was a boss fight, losing might mean resetting progress, losing his village. He couldn't let that happen, not after all the time he'd spent optimizing Oakhaven. With a shaky breath, he tapped the reality editor. The screen shifted to a complex overlay of variables, gravity, electromagnetism, thermodynamics. His physics training kicked in, a desperate anchor in the surreal storm. The mage's magic was energy-based, likely electromagnetic in nature given the light and vibrations. If he could disrupt that. He selected electromagnetism, his fingers trembling as he input commands. A localized electromagnetic pulse, small scale, focused on the area around the mages. It would scramble their spells, maybe even their senses. The cost flashed on screen, 35 divine energy. Nearly all he had left. He hesitated for a second, watching as the golden net closed in. Then he confirmed. The effect was instantaneous. A silent, invisible wave erupted from the center of the screen. In Oakhaven, the air itself seemed to shudder. The golden strands of magic flickered, then dissolved into sparks that fizzled out like dying fireflies. Elara staggered back, her hands flying to her temples as if struck by a sudden migraine. The other mages cried out, Corrin doubled over, clutching his head, while one of the unnamed juniors collapsed to his knees, gasping. The portal behind them wavered, its edges fraying into static. What is this? Elara snarled, her voice strained. No counterspell, no ward. It's just emptiness. Leo watched, his own breath coming in short gasps. The reality editor showed the electromagnetism variable spiking and then flatlining, the energy spent. His divine energy counter dropped to 4 DE, a pitiful remnant glowing red in the corner. On screen, the mages were disoriented, their magical auras dimmed to faint glimmers. Corrin tried to raise a hand, to cast another spell, but his fingers trembled, and nothing happened. The third junior mage, a woman with braided hair, vomited onto the grass, her body rejecting the sudden absence of magical resonance. Elara's eyes narrowed, scanning the empty air where she sensed the entity. You hide behind equations, she spat. You think your cold logic can shield you? We will find you. We will tear this realm apart until you are nothing but a memory. But her threat was hollow. The EMP had done more than disrupt their spells, it had frayed the fabric of their connection. The portal flickered again, and with a sound like shattering glass, it collapsed inward, sucking the mages back through in a whirl of light and shadow. Elara's furious face was the last to vanish, her mouth open in a silent shout. Then they were gone, and the screen returned to the peaceful view of Oakhaven, the villagers unaware of the battle that had just raged in their midst. Leo slumped back in his chair, his phone slipping from his sweaty palm to clatter on the desk. His heart pounded in his ears, loud in the sudden silence of his room. He stared at the ceiling, the fluorescent light harsh against his eyes. That wasn't a game. That couldn't have been a game. The way Elara looked at him, through him, the raw hatred in her voice, the physical reactions of the mages. He'd felt their pain, their confusion, in the set of their shoulders, the panic in their eyes. And the cost, 35 divine energy, almost everything he had. Games didn't demand that kind of sacrifice for a casual event. He picked up his phone again, his hands still shaking. The screen showed Oakhaven as normal, villagers tending to crops with the levers he'd introduced, Alden the blacksmith hammering at something in his forge. But in the corner, the divine energy counter blinked red, 4 out of 100 DE. A warning message popped up, divine energy critically low. Recharge required. Recharge? How? He'd never seen that before. The app had always just slowly regenerated energy over time, or he'd earned it through village efficiency. Now it felt like a resource he'd squandered, something finite and precious. His mind replayed the assault. The golden net, the EMP, Elara's words, cold equations. She'd said that before. It echoed in his head, a phrase that didn't belong in a fantasy game. Equations were his world, physics, reality. Was he somehow affecting reality? No, that was impossible. It had to be a hyper-advanced simulation, some AI-driven narrative that adapted to his actions. But the dread in his gut said otherwise. He thought of the orbital edits, the musket blueprint, each time, he'd been tweaking variables, introducing science into a magical world. What if it wasn't just a world in his phone? He stood up, pacing the small room. The energy drink tasted sour in his mouth. He needed to think, to rationalize. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elara's furious face, the way the magic had dissolved under his EMP. It had been so easy, a few taps, and he defeated a team of powerful mages. What did that make him? In the celestial spheres, far from Leo's dorm room, Aquaria and the star gods watched through scrying orbs. The orbs floated in a chamber of crystalline light, their surfaces showing the aftermath of the assault, Elara and her mages stumbling back through the portal, disoriented and defeated. Aquaria's form, a being of flowing water and serene grace, trembled with rage. Did you see? She whispered, her voice like crashing waves. No spell, no divine intervention. Just, a void. A calculation that erased our magic. One of the star gods, a figure wreathed in starlight and cosmic dust, leaned forward. His power is not of this world. It overwrites our domains with mathematical precision. Gravity, orbits, now electromagnetism, each a blow to our very essence. Another, whose form shifted like constellations, spoke with a voice that echoed through the void. We have been patient. We have probed. Now we see the truth, this god of physics is no deity. He is an anomaly, a cancer in the fabric of our reality. And he must be excised. Aquaria's eyes, deep as oceans, hardened. Then it is war. A full-scale pantheon war. We will marshal every god, every archmage, every ounce of magic in this world. We will storm his nexus, tear it apart atom by atom, until nothing remains but the silence he so cherishes. The star gods nodded in unison, their light dimming with solemn intent. Let the mortals prepare. Let the armies gather. We will not fail again. The scrying orbs went dark, leaving the chamber in a gloom that felt heavier than any shadow. In Oakhaven, a faint tremor passed through the ground, a distant echo of divine wrath. Marta, the village elder, paused in her work, looking up at the sky with a frown. But Leo, staring at his phone screen, saw only the low-energy warning, and the first, cold seed of doubt took root in his mind. Leo's fingers trembled as he stared at the glowing screen of his phone, the Deus Ex Machina app interface still shimmering with residual energy from the recent confrontation. The battle had ended, but the aftermath lingered in the air of his cramped dorm room, the scent of ozone mixed with the stale coffee on his desk. He blinked slowly, trying to shake off the lingering image of that furious woman's face, her eyes blazing with a hatred that felt too visceral for any game. He tapped the status icon in the top right corner, and the app displayed his current resources with clinical precision. The numbers made his stomach clench. Divine Energy, 4/100. A thin red bar pulsed beneath the figure, warning him of critically low reserves. Below it, a new section had appeared, threat level, high, with 3 crimson exclamation marks that seemed to throb in time with his heartbeat. The interface had never shown anything like this before. Usually, it was all cheerful notifications about village happiness or crop yields, not military-style threat assessments. Okay, Leo muttered to himself, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Just need to grind a bit. Like any mobile game, do some quests, help some villagers, recharge the energy. He forced a laugh that sounded hollow in the quiet room. It's just a game. Those mages were just, really advanced AI. Right? But the memory of their spells fizzling against his electromagnetic pulse felt too real. The way their robes had crackled with static, the genuine panic in their eyes as their magic failed, it had all been disturbingly detailed. Leo shook his head, pushing the thoughts aside. He was a physics major, not a fantasy enthusiast. He dealt with equations and constants, not magical portals and angry sorcerers. He navigated back to the world map, his finger hovering over the pixelated medieval landscape. The village of Oakhaven still showed improved conditions from his earlier interventions, the drought had been alleviated, and the crops were growing. But there were other settlements scattered across the map, little clusters of huts and fields marked with icons indicating various needs. One caught his eye, a village called Riverbend, flagged with a water droplet symbol and a frowning face. The tooltip read, "Poor irrigation, crops withering." Perfect, Leo said, a familiar excitement creeping back into his voice. This was what he loved about the app, solving problems with simple physics. No magic, no divine intervention, just good old scientific principles applied through a god simulator. He selected Riverbend, and the view zoomed in to show a settlement nestled along a lazy river. The fields were indeed parched, with wilting plants and cracked earth, while the river flowed nearby, seemingly untouched. Leo opened the Reality Editor tool, the interface shifting to show a complex array of sliders and variables. Gravity, atmospheric pressure, fluid dynamics, thermodynamics, all the fundamental forces of the universe reduced to adjustable parameters. He focused on the hydrology section, his physics training kicking in. Basic irrigation, he murmured. Just need to optimize the water flow from the river to the fields. Bernoulli's principle, maybe some capillary action. He began making adjustments, his fingers moving with practiced ease. First, he increased the gravitational pull slightly in a localized area near the riverbank, creating a gentle slope that would guide water toward the fields. The app calculated the energy cost, 3 divine energy. He confirmed the edit, watching as the terrain in the simulation subtly shifted, Earth moving as if guided by invisible hands. His energy ticked up to 7/100, a small recharge from the helpful action, as the game termed it. Next, he adjusted the surface tension of the water, making it more likely to spread through the soil. Another 2 energy spent, bringing him to 9/100. Then he tweaked the evaporation rate in the area, reducing it to conserve moisture. The changes were minute, barely noticeable on the grand scale of physics, but in the confined space of Riverbend, they would be transformative. As he worked, he could see the villagers in the simulation beginning to react, pixelated figures pointing at the river, gathering near the newly moistened fields. Their happiness indicators shifted from frowning faces to neutral expressions. But something felt off. Leo squinted at the screen. One of the villagers, a woman with a child, wasn't just changing expressions. She was kneeling in the damp soil, her shoulders shaking. Was she crying? The animation was too detailed, showing individual tears tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. Another villager, an old man with a staff, was looking up at the sky with a confused, almost fearful expression, as if searching for a divine sign that wasn't there. Weird attention to detail, Leo muttered, but a cold knot was forming in his chest. He'd never seen NPCs display such nuanced emotions before. Usually, they just cheered or danced when he helped them. These reactions felt genuine. Like real people experiencing real relief after a drought. He pushed the discomfort aside and continued his work. Selecting another village, Hillcrest, this time, he noticed they had issues with soil erosion. Simple fix, adjust the cohesion of the soil particles, reinforce the slopes. He spent another 5 energy on the edit, watching as his reserves climbed to 14/100. The recharge was slow, agonizingly so, but it was progress. As he confirmed the changes, he saw the Hillcrest villagers reacting with similar detailed emotions, a young man touching the stabilized earth with wonder, an elder praying to a stone altar that suddenly seemed less responsive. Meanwhile, in the celestial spheres, a realm of swirling nebulae and crystalline palaces that existed beyond mortal perception, the pantheon was mobilizing. Aquaria, the water goddess, stood in her fluid throne room, her form shimmering like a waterfall caught in moonlight. Around her, other deities gathered, their auras clashing and merging in a symphony of divine power. A god of war, clad in armor forged from dying stars, slammed a fist against an obsidian table. This physics entity mocks us. It overwrites our domains with its cold equations. His voice echoed through the chamber, making the very fabric of reality tremble. A goddess of magic, her robes woven from spell threads, nodded grimly. Ilara's report confirms it. The entity operates through non-magical means, manipulating fundamental forces directly. Our spells fail against it because it changes the rules upon which magic itself depends. Aquaria's eyes, deep as ocean trenches, focused on a scrying orb showing Leo's interface, a window into his world. It treats our reality as a game, she said, her voice dripping with icy fury. My hydrological spells in Riverbend just failed. The water flows according to gradients and pressure differentials now. Not my will. The star gods, their forms constellations given sentience, added their voices. Our astrological alignments are still disrupted from its orbital edits. Prophecies are meaningless when the stars themselves obey physics instead of destiny. They began pooling their power, a convergence of divine energies that made the celestial spheres glow with unbearable light. War gods sharpened ethereal blades. Magic deities wove containment spells of unimaginable complexity. Nature gods summoned primal forces. Together, they focused on the location Ilara had pinpointed, the physics nexus where Leo sat, oblivious to the storm gathering around him. Back in his dorm, Leo was working on a third village, Mistvale. They had temperature issues, crops freezing at night. He adjusted the specific heat capacity of the air in the valley, spending 4 energy to create a more stable thermal environment. His reserves reached 18 out of 100. As the changes took effect, he watched the villagers' reactions closely. This time, a group of them were arguing, pointing at the sky, then at the suddenly warmer fields, their pixelated faces showing clear confusion and fear. One priest was trying to cast a warming spell, but the magic fizzled into nothingness, leaving him staring at his hands in disbelief. That's not normal game behavior, Leo whispered, his earlier unease returning full force. NPCs in God Sims didn't have complex social interactions or magical failures. They just accepted the player's interventions as divine will. These people were questioning, investigating, experiencing genuine distress. He thought about the mage from earlier, Ilara. Her fury had been too real. The way her binding spells had unraveled against his EMP. It hadn't felt like scripted game mechanics. It had felt like a battle. He was about to close the app, to take a break and clear his head, when the interface suddenly glitched. The screen flickered, colors bleeding into each other. Warning messages popped up, reality instability detected, before vanishing. Then, around the edges of his phone screen, portals began to open. Not in the game world. In his interface. Tearing through the digital landscape like wounds in reality itself. First one appeared to the left, a swirling vortex of celestial fire, and from it stepped a towering figure clad in starlight armor, a sword burning with cosmic energy. A star god's avatar, its eyes like supernovae. Then another portal opened to the right, disgorging a being of pure magic, robes flowing with living spells that crackled in the air. A goddess of magic, her fingers already weaving intricate patterns of power. A third portal opened above, and Aquaria emerged, water cascading from her form, her expression a mask of divine wrath. A fourth, below, revealed the war god, his presence making the very pixels of the screen vibrate with impending violence. They surrounded Leo's viewpoint, for divine avatars positioned at the cardinal points of his interface, cutting off any escape. Their power pressed against the boundaries of the app, making the phone grow warm in his hands, the glass threatening to crack from the strain. Leo's breath caught in his throat. He could see every detail, the individual links in the war god's armor, the droplets of water suspended around Aquaria, the spell threads unraveling from the magic goddess's sleeves. They weren't pixelated game models. They were horrifyingly, impossibly real. The war god raised his sword, the blade humming with contained destruction. Aquaria lifted a hand, and the water around her formed into sharp, crystalline spears. The magic goddess completed her weaving, and a cage of glowing runes began to form around Leo's viewpoint. The star god simply stared, its gaze weighing the very laws of physics that Leo had been manipulating. In that moment, hunched over his phone in a dim dorm room, Leo finally understood. This wasn't a game. Those weren't NPCs. And the divine energy he'd been spending wasn't some abstract resource, it was the power to rewrite reality itself, with real consequences for real people. And now, the gods of that reality had come for him. Leo stared at the glowing screen of his phone, the Deus Ex Machina interface pulsing with an ominous red border he'd never seen before. The 4 portals shimmered around the edges of his display, each a different color, aquamarine for water, silver-white for stars, crimson for war, and violet for magic. He could see movement within them, shapes coalescing into forms that made his stomach tighten. The app's ambient music, usually a soothing synth melody, had shifted to a low, thrumming bassline that vibrated through his fingers. He was sitting cross-legged on his dorm room bed, textbooks on quantum mechanics scattered around him like a fortress of normalcy. Outside his window, the evening sky over campus was peaceful, dotted with early stars. But on the screen, reality was fracturing. The aquamarine portal erupted first. A tidal wave of impossible scale crashed through, not water as Leo knew it, but something denser, shimmering with ethereal light. It filled the app's view of Oakhaven, swallowing the village's thatched roofs and stone walls in a surge of divine hydrology. Leo could see the villagers, tiny pixelated figures, scrambling for higher ground, their animations jerky with panic. Marta, the elder, was waving her arms frantically, her mouth open in a silent scream. Brother Kalen knelt in prayer, but his gestures faltered as the water goddess's power overwhelmed his faith. Leo's thumb hovered over the screen. This is just a really intense event, he told himself, his voice a whisper in the quiet room. Maybe it's a boss raid update. They did say the game had seasonal content. But the sweat on his palms betrayed him. He'd never seen a mobile game render water with such terrifying detail, each droplet seemed to catch the light of a non-existent sun, refracting into rainbows that bled into the village's cobblestones. Before he could react, the silver-white portal flared. Bolts of celestial energy, like condensed starlight, shot through the interface. They weren't lasers or magic missiles, they were fragments of cosmic order, tearing through the sky above Oakhaven with a sound Leo could almost hear through the phone's speaker, a high-pitched whine that set his teeth on edge. The bolts struck the ground, not with explosions, but with silent, searing impacts that left craters of melted stone and twisted physics. Gravity around the impact sites wavered visibly in the app's display, objects floating upward before crashing down. Okay, Leo muttered, his physics training kicking in despite his denial. Those are violating conservation of energy. No, wait, it's a game. They can do whatever. He tapped the reality editor tool, its interface popping up with sliders for gravity, electromagnetism, atmospheric pressure, and more. His divine energy read 18/100, a pitiful green bar in the corner. He'd recharged it helping those villages, but now it felt like bringing a water pistol to a tsunami. The crimson and violet portals activated simultaneously. From the war god's gateway, spectral armies marched, soldiers of light and shadow, their forms shifting between solid and ethereal, armed with weapons that crackled with divine fury. They moved with unnatural coordination, flanking the village from the east. From the magic goddess's portal, tendrils of violet energy snaked out, seeking to rewrite the local reality back to magical norms. Leo saw Master Torin, the local mage, trying to cast a reinforcement spell, but the violet tendrils latched onto his magic, causing it to sputter and fail. Torin's pixelated face contorted in confusion and fear. Leo's breath hitched. He zoomed in on Alden, the blacksmith, who was clutching the newly crafted flintlock musket. The man's hands were trembling as he aimed at a spectral soldier, but the firearm jammed. The gunpowder physics Leo had introduced were clashing with the war god's domain, causing misfires. Alden threw the musket aside in despair, his shoulders slumping. I have to do something, Leo thought, his denial warring with a growing dread. If I lose this event, I'll have to grind for days to recover. He selected the gravity slider in the reality editor. The tool explained it in game terms: create localized gravity wells to disrupt enemy formations. Cost, 5 divine energy per well. He dragged his finger across the screen, placing 3 gravity wells, one in the path of the tidal wave, one amidst the celestial bolts, and one where the spectral armies were thickest. The app deducted 15 divine energy, leaving him with 3/100. The wells appeared as swirling vortices of distorted space, visible as ripples in the app's graphics. They sucked in the tidal wave, bending the water into spirals that collapsed inward. The celestial bolts curved off course, spiraling into the wells like moths to a flame. The spectral soldiers stumbled, their forms stretching and compressing as gravity tore at them. But the pantheon wasn't done. Aquaria's face appeared in the aquamarine portal, her features a mask of divine rage. She gestured, and the tidal wave reformed, larger, angrier. The star gods coalesced their bolts into a single beam of white-hot energy. The war god rallied his armies, and the magic goddess's tendrils multiplied, weaving a net of violet light aimed at Leo's interface itself. Leo's hands were shaking now. The phone felt hot against his skin. He glanced at his dorm room. The posters of Einstein and Feynman stared back, mocking him with their certainty. This isn't real, he repeated, a mantra. But the villagers' screams, though silent, felt real. He saw Marta helping children onto rooftops, her movements desperate. Brother Kalen was trying to bless the water, but his prayers dissolved into nothingness. He needed more power. The reality editor offered an option he'd never used: emergency override, sacrifice future divine energy regeneration for immediate burst. Warning, irreversible. The cost was his next 50 points of potential energy, meaning he wouldn't be able to recharge naturally for days in-game. Leo hesitated. It's just a resource management choice, he told himself, but his thumb trembled. He tapped it. The app flared, his divine energy jumping from 3 to 53 out of 100 in an instant, but a timer appeared, regeneration locked, 120 hours. He had minutes, not hours. He went back to the gravity slider, this time pushing it to extremes. The tool labeled, theoretical, microsingularities. Cost, 20 divine energy each. He created 2, one before Aquaria's tidal wave, one in the path of the star god's beam. The micro-black holes, rendered as tiny, dark spheres with light bending around them, sucked in everything. The tidal wave vanished into nothingness with a silent implosion. The celestial beam fractured, its energy dissipating into the singularities. The spectral armies recoiled, their forms unraveling. The violet tendrils snapped, recoiling back into the magic goddess's portal. But the cost was brutal. Leo's divine energy plummeted, 53 to 33, then 33 to 13 as the singularities stabilized. He was down to 13/100, the green bar a sliver. The Pantheon's avatars glared through the portals, their expressions shifting from fury to shock. Aquaria's form flickered, her connection weakening. The star god's portal dimmed. The war god's armies dissipated into mist. The magic goddess's violet light faded. For a moment, there was stillness on the screen. Oakhaven was battered, buildings damaged, fields flooded, villagers huddled in fear, but intact. Leo let out a shaky breath, his heart pounding against his ribs. I did it. I won the event. He almost smiled, the gamer's triumph surging through him. But then he noticed the details. Marta was weeping over an injured villager, her tears rendered with unsettling clarity. Alden was picking up the broken musket, his face a mix of awe and horror. Master Torin was staring at his hands, as if they'd betrayed him. Leo's phone buzzed violently in his hand. The screen flickered, colors bleeding into static. A warning message popped up, system overload, cooling required. The device was hot enough to burn, the plastic casing creaking. He almost dropped it, fumbling to set it on his textbook. The static cleared for a second, showing the Pantheon's portals collapsing one by one, their divine avatars fading with looks of grim determination. Then, through the speaker, a voice crackled, not the app's synthesized sounds, but a real, human voice, female and sharp with anger. It was Elara, the archmage he'd faced before. Her words were clear, cutting through the static, "We know you're there, false god." The screen went black. Leo sat in the darkening dorm room, the only light from the campus street lamps outside. His phone lay silent, overheated and dead. He could still hear Elara's voice echoing in his mind, a sound that didn't belong in any game. His hands were cold, his breath shallow. Outside, a breeze rustled the trees, normal and mundane. But on the bed, the phone's screen remained dark, a void where his reality had just shattered. The phone lay on Leo's desk, its screen dark and cool to the touch after the violent overheating. For several minutes, he simply stared at it, his fingers trembling slightly as they hovered above the polished surface. The last echoes of Archmage Elara's voice, "We know you're there, false god," still reverberated in his mind with unsettling clarity. Too clear. Too real. He picked up the device, feeling its familiar weight. The Deus Ex Machina app icon glowed softly against the dark background, a stylized gear with celestial rings that had once seemed charmingly game-like. Now it looked ominous. Leo tapped it open, half expecting the screen to shatter or the phone to explode. The interface loaded normally. His divine energy read 13 out of 100, the number pulsing faintly in red. The reality editor tool remained accessible, its physics variable sliders ready for adjustment. The invention sketchpad showed his flintlock musket blueprint, the one Alden the blacksmith had crafted in Oakhaven. Everything appeared exactly as it had for weeks, except for the new notification blinking in the corner, connection stability, 42%. Reality sync, active. Reality sync, Leo muttered. He'd never noticed that before. Had it always been there, hidden in the code? Or had the recent battles triggered it? He set the phone down and opened his laptop. The familiar hum of its fan filled his small dorm room, a sound of normalcy that felt desperately needed. Leo typed Deus Ex Machina God Simulator into the search bar and hit enter. Nothing. No official website. No developer studio. No user reviews. No Reddit threads. No YouTube gameplay videos. The search results showed only Latin translations of the phrase, God from the machine, and philosophical discussions about narrative devices. He tried variations, Deus Ex Machina mobile game, physics God simulator app, reality editing game. Each search returned the same eerie silence, as if the app had never existed outside his phone. Leo's breath caught. He remembered downloading it weeks ago, during a particularly brutal all-nighter studying fluid dynamics. The App Store page had looked professional enough, screenshots of village management, physics tools, a cozy aesthetic. He'd tapped install without a second thought, desperate for any distraction from equations and problem sets. But now he couldn't find the download in his purchase history. The App Store showed no record of it ever being listed. As if it had appeared on his phone by magic. No, not magic. Leo rejected the word instinctively. Magic wasn't real. But the thought chilled him nonetheless. He opened the app again and navigated to Oakhaven. The village appeared in isometric view, its thatched roofs and dirt streets rendered in pleasing pixel art. But something was different. The villagers, Marta the Elder, Brother Kalen, Master Torin, moved with jerky, anxious animations. Their pixelated faces showed expressions of fear and confusion. Alden the blacksmith stood by his forge, hammering at something with frantic energy. Leo zoomed in. The damage from the Pantheon's attack was visible, cracked buildings, scorched earth where the celestial bolts had struck, puddles from Aquaria's tidal wave that refused to evaporate normally. He tapped Marta. A dialogue box appeared, "The gods have abandoned us. The world makes no sense anymore. Please, if you can hear us, help." The words felt too raw. Too human. Game characters didn't plead like that. Leo minimized the app and opened his physics textbook. He flipped to the chapter on gravity, his eyes scanning equations for orbital mechanics, microsingularities, gravitational wells. Then he pulled up the app's log of his recent actions, gravity variable adjusted, local G increased by 300% for 0.3 seconds. Energy cost, 15 DE. Microsingularity created, radius 0.5 meters, duration 2 seconds. Energy cost, 20 DE. The numbers matched perfectly. Not simplified game approximations, but precise calculations that would require solving complex field equations in real time. No mobile game could process that without supercomputer-level hardware. He cross-referenced his irrigation edits in Riverbend. The app had recorded fluid dynamics adjustments, viscosity, pressure gradients, laminar flow optimization. Exactly the principles he'd learned in his hydrology class. The thermal regulation in Mistvale matched textbook examples of specific heat capacity manipulation. Too perfect. Every action he'd taken through the reality editor corresponded precisely to real-world physics principles. Not game mechanics. Physics. Leo's heart began to pound. He stood up, pacing the small room. His gaze fell on the invention sketchpad tool. He'd drawn a simple flintlock musket, a basic firearm from Earth's history. Alden had built it. In Oakhaven. A medieval blacksmith had constructed a weapon from another world's technology. It can't be, he whispered. But the evidence mounted. The emotional reactions of the villagers. The way Archmage's binding spells had failed against electromagnetic interference. The pantheon's coordinated attack using divine domains that mirrored natural forces, water, celestial bodies, war as kinetic energy, magic as reality manipulation. They weren't game enemies. They were real beings whose world operated on magical principles. And he was overriding those principles with physics. Leo sank back into his chair, his mind reeling. The cozy god simulator wasn't a game. It was an interface. A connection. To a real world. He looked at his divine energy, 13/100. The emergency override had locked regeneration for 120 hours. He had almost nothing left. But he needed to know. He needed confirmation. Opening the reality editor, Leo navigated to the communication protocols. The tool usually allowed him to send divine messages to villages, simple text pop-ups that appeared as revelations or omens. But now he saw a new option, data pulse transmission. The description read, send raw information packets through active dimensional conduits. Cost, 10 DE minimum. Active dimensional conduits. The portals. He had 13 DE. Enough for one pulse. After that, he'd be down to 3, virtually powerless. Leo's fingers hovered over the interface. This was insane. If he was wrong, he'd waste precious energy on a useless feature. If he was right. He thought of Alara's voice through the static. Her team of mages investigating magical failures. The Pantheon's fury. Oakhaven's trauma. Okay, he breathed. One last test. He selected the data pulse transmission option. The interface asked for content. Leo typed slowly, each keystroke feeling heavier than the last, I'm not a god. I'm a student. What is this? Simple. Direct. No pretense. The cost displayed, 10 DE. He'd be left with 3. Leo hesitated. His thumb trembled above the confirm button. The phone felt alien in his hand, not a gaming device, but a window. A weapon. A mistake. He pressed it. The screen flashed white. The 10 DE drained instantly, leaving the counter at 3 out of 100. A progress bar appeared, transmitting data pulse. Establishing connection. It crawled forward, agonizingly slow. In Oakhaven, through the app's view, Leo saw the air above the village shimmer. One of the collapsed portal sites, where the magic goddess had emerged, flickered with unstable energy. The data pulse was traveling back through the dimensional tear. The progress bar reached 100%. Transmission complete. Nothing happened for a long moment. Leo stared at the screen, his breath held. Had it worked? Had it failed? Was he just imagining all of this? Then the app glitched. The screen fractured into static, the pixel art dissolving into noise. Through the distortion, a figure resolved, not a game sprite, but a hazy image of a woman in elaborate robes, her face sharp with intelligence and worry. Archmage. Her lips moved. No sound came through, but Leo could read the words forming, received. Analyzing. The image flickered. Elara turned, speaking to someone off-screen, Corrin, perhaps, or another mage. Her hands moved in complex gestures, casting analysis spells. Arcane symbols floated around the transmitted message, dissecting its structure. Leo watched, frozen. This wasn't a cut scene. This was a live feed. Elara's expression shifted. First confusion, then dawning horror. She looked directly at the screen, directly at Leo, though she couldn't see him. Her eyes widened with realization. She spoke again, the words clear despite the static, "It's not divine. It's data. Pure information. No magic signature. No soul imprint." She turned to her companions, her face pale. The god of physics isn't a deity. It's a mortal. From another reality. One where our world is entertainment. The feed cut out. The app crashed, returning to Leo's home screen. He sat in the sudden silence of his dorm room, the phone dark in his hand. The truth had dawned. And it was worse than anything he could have imagined. The phone screen flickered, static dancing across the interface of Deus Ex Machina. Leo's fingers trembled as he held the device, its warmth bleeding into his palms. He sat on the edge of his dorm bed, textbooks on quantum mechanics and fluid dynamics scattered around him like fallen leaves. Through the app's display, he could see the aftermath of the Pantheon's assault, Oakhaven's fields scarred by celestial burns, buildings leaning at unnatural angles where gravity had warped, and villagers huddled in clusters, their faces etched with a terror too vivid for pixels. A new portal shimmered into existence on the screen, different from the violent gateways of before. This one glowed with a steady, silver light, its edges defined by intricate runes that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic cadence. No divine avatars emerged. Instead, a figure stepped forward, Archmage Elara, her robes of deep blue embroidered with constellations that seemed to shift under their own power. Her expression held none of the fury Leo had seen during their last encounter. Instead, her eyes carried a weight of comprehension, a haunted realization that made Leo's stomach tighten. "Leo," her voice echoed through the phone's speaker, clear and resonant despite the static. "We have ceased our attacks. Will you speak with us?" He swallowed, his throat dry. The data pulse he'd sent, the admission of his ignorance, hung between them like an unspoken truth. He tapped the screen, zooming in on Elara's face. Every detail was there, the fine lines around her eyes, the faint scar along her jawline, the way her silver hair caught the light from the portal. No game rendered this. No algorithm simulated the subtle tremor in her hands as she clasped them before her. "I'm listening," Leo said, his voice barely above a whisper. He felt absurd, talking to a phone as if it were a window to another world. But the evidence was there, the perfect match between his physics edits and real-world principles, the villagers' reactions, the way the Pantheon's magic had interacted with his gravity wells. He couldn't deny it any longer. Elara gestured, and the portal widened. Behind her, Leo could see the other members of the Pantheon, Aquaria, her form composed of flowing water that shimmered with suppressed rage, the star gods, their bodies constellations of light that flickered erratically, a war god in burnished armor, his hand resting on the hilt of a sword that bled shadows, and a magic goddess whose robes were woven from spells, each thread glowing with arcane energy. They watched him, their expressions a mixture of fury, curiosity, and desperation. "You have rewritten the laws of our reality," Elara said, her voice steady but edged with exhaustion. "Every tap of your finger has overwritten magic with science. Prayers fail. Spells unravel. Dragons fall from the sky because the air no longer holds them aloft with enchantment. We are unraveling, Leo. And we did not know why, until now." Leo's mind raced. He thought of the drought-stricken village, the rain he'd summoned by adjusting atmospheric pressure. The levers he'd sketched for irrigation. The orbital edits to help crops grow. He'd been solving puzzles, optimizing systems, treating it all like a relaxing game. But each action had been a hammer blow to a world built on different rules. "I didn't know," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "I thought it was a game. A god simulator. I was just trying to relax." A ripple went through the Pantheon. Aquaria's watery form surged forward, her voice a torrent of anger. "Relax? You call this relaxation? My rivers run backward. My tides ignore the moon. Children pray for rain and get equations instead." Elara raised a hand, and Aquaria subsided, though her form continued to churn. "Show us," Elara said to Leo. "Show us how this tool works." Leo hesitated. His divine energy was at 3/100, the regeneration locked for another 116 hours. But the reality editor still functioned, its interface glowing softly on the screen. He took a deep breath and tapped the tool open. A holographic display, visible only to him, projected above his phone, showing variables for gravity, electromagnetism, thermodynamics, and more. Each could be adjusted with sliders and numerical inputs, costing divine energy. I adjust these, Leo explained, his voice gaining strength as he fell into the familiar territory of physics. See this gravity value? I lowered it here, he pointed to a coordinate over Oakhaven, to create micro-black holes that absorbed your attacks. But it also made buildings lighter, changed how plants grow. It's not magic. It's math. Applied through this interface. He demonstrated, moving a slider for atmospheric pressure in a non-critical area. The display showed the energy cost, 5 DE, which he didn't have, but the principle was clear. Elara watched, her eyes widening as she saw the numbers shift, the formulas calculating outcomes in real time. There is no will behind it, she murmured. No prayer, no sacrifice. Just, rules. Laws, Leo corrected gently. Physical laws. They're consistent. Predictable. But once changed. He trailed off, thinking of entropy, of irreversible processes. Some changes might be permanent. You can't unbreak an egg. The pantheon stirred. The magic goddess floated forward, her spell-woven robes rustling. Our domains are fading, she said, her voice like chimes. Every time you introduce a new law, it overwrites our magic. My reinforcement spells fail because your gravity edits make them unnecessary. Or worse, contradictory. Leo remembered Master Torin, the Oakhaven mage whose spell had failed. He'd seen it happen, a wall that should have been strengthened by magic instead crumbling under its own weight because Leo had tweaked material cohesion. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. I'll stop. I won't use the app again. Will that be enough? The war god growled, his shadowy sword pulsing. The damage is done. Your physics have taken root. Like weeds in a garden. Elara turned to the pantheon. We have seen his power. He neutralized our combined assault with ease. If he is willing to help, perhaps we can salvage this. She looked back at Leo. Will you aid us? Not as a god, but as, whatever you are. A student of these laws. Leo's mind whirled. The thought of continuing made his skin crawl, this wasn't a game anymore. But the alternative was abandoning a world to collapse. He thought of Marta, the village elder, Alden the blacksmith, Brother Kalen and his failed prayers. They were real people, suffering because of his ignorance. I'll help, he said finally. But I need to understand what's broken. And I need time. My energy is almost gone, and it won't recharge for days. We will provide what data we can, Elara said. Our scrying pools, our arcane records. We will show you the fractures in our reality. She paused. But know this, Leo, not all of us agree with this course. As she spoke, the pantheon split. Aquaria and the war god drew back, their forms darkening. This is madness, Aquaria hissed. He is a blight. A cancer. We should tear him from his world and burn his influence from ours. The star gods shimmered uncertainly, while the magic goddess floated closer to Elara. There is potential here, the magic goddess said. A new kind of order. But it must be controlled. Leo watched, his heart pounding. The truce was fragile, balanced on a knife's edge. He had promised to help, but he could see the fury in Aquaria's eyes, the readiness for violence in the war god's stance. They wanted him gone, erased. And if they decided to act, he had 3 divine energy and a locked regeneration timer. No gravity wells, no singularities. Nothing. We will convene in the celestial spheres, Elara said, her voice cutting through the tension. Leo, prepare yourself. We will contact you when we have information. She turned to the divided pantheon. Until then, no attacks. Or I will consider it a breach of our accord. The portal began to close, its silver light dimming. But just before it vanished, Aquaria's voice slithered through, cold and final. This is not over, false god. Your laws will not save you. Then they were gone. The screen returned to the Deus Ex Machina interface, showing Oakhaven's battered landscape. Leo set the phone down, his hands shaking. He had stepped from denial into a nightmare of responsibility. And somewhere, in a realm of magic and gods, a faction was plotting his destruction. Leo stared at his phone screen, the glow casting shadows across his cramped dorm room. The Deus Ex Machina app displayed a three-dimensional map of Oakhaven and its surroundings, with pulsing red zones marking areas of critical instability. Archmage Alara's voice came through the speaker, calm but urgent, like a surgeon guiding a novice through a delicate operation. The gravity well you created near the eastern farmlands is causing soil liquefaction, Alara explained. Her voice had a slight echo, as if transmitted through layers of reality. The ground is turning to slurry, and 3 homes have already begun to sink. You must revert the gravitational constant to its natural state, but do it gradually. A sudden shift could trigger seismic activity. Leo's fingers trembled as he opened the reality editor. The interface showed complex physics variables, gravitational force, atmospheric pressure, orbital parameters, all represented as sliders and numerical fields. His divine energy counter glowed a worrying red, 3 out of 100. Regeneration locked for 115 hours, 42 minutes. He had nothing to spend, but Alara had warned him that using the editor without energy would draw from something else. His own vitality. How do I do this without DE? Leo asked, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. The app will find a way, Alara replied. It always does. But there will be a cost. Focus on the gravity variable for grid sector E7. Adjust it by 0.1% per minute until it reaches baseline. Leo dragged the gravity slider. The number ticked down from 1.15 G to 1.149 G. Immediately, a wave of dizziness washed over him. His vision blurred at the edges, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. On the screen, the red zone around the eastern farmlands pulsed slightly less violently. In the village below, through the app's observational window, he saw Marta the village elder directing people away from the unstable ground. The soil stopped flowing like water, solidifying into damp earth. Good, Alara said. Now the atmospheric leak over the northern forest. Your pressure adjustments created a vacuum that's pulling oxygen out of the area. Trees are withering, and animals are suffocating. Leo switched to atmospheric controls. The pressure variable for sector N3 showed 0.85 atmospheres, dangerously low. He nudged it upward. 0.851, 0.852. Each increment felt like a weight pressing on his chest. His breathing became labored, as if he were the one struggling for air. On screen, the withering leaves of oaks and pines regained a hint of green. A deer that had been collapsed on the forest floor staggered to its feet and bounded away. He worked for hours, methodically patching leaks and reverting tweaks. The dorm room faded around him, the hum of his laptop, the distant sounds of campus life, the stale smell of instant noodles, all receded into background noise. His world narrowed to the phone screen and the creeping exhaustion that settled into his bones. His hands grew clammy, and a persistent headache throbbed behind his eyes. Once, he glanced in the mirror above his desk and barely recognized the pale, hollow-eyed student staring back. The planetary orbits are the most critical, Alara said, her voice pulling him back. Your adjustments to stabilize seasons disrupted celestial harmonies. The moon's orbit is decaying, and 2 minor stars have shifted positions. Astrological magic has gone silent across continents. Priests can no longer read omens, and navigation spells are failing. Leo zoomed out on the map until the planet filled the screen, surrounded by its celestial companions. Orbital parameters flashed with warning symbols. The moon's elliptical path showed a gradual inward spiral. Fixing this would require recalculating gravitational interactions across the entire system, a task that made his physics textbook seem like children's puzzles. I need to run simulations first, Leo muttered, more to himself than to Alara. He opened a notepad app on his laptop and began scribbling equations. Mass ratios. Angular momentum. Tidal forces. His mind, trained for exams and problem sets, latched onto the familiar logic of numbers. For a moment, the horror of the situation faded, replaced by the pure challenge of a physics problem. But the cost returned when he started implementing the fixes. He adjusted the moon's orbital velocity by 0.05%. A sharp pain lanced through his temples, and his nose began to bleed, crimson droplets splattering on his keyboard. On screen, the moon's spiral halted, its path stabilizing into a clean ellipse. Across the magical world, in temples and observatories, astrologers felt a shudder in their divination tools, not the return of magic, but something colder, more precise. He moved to the errant stars, correcting their positions relative to the planetary plane. Each adjustment drained him further. His muscles ached as if he'd run a marathon. His vision swam, and he had to grip the edge of his desk to stay upright. The phone grew warm in his hand, the app's interface flickering occasionally with static. Through it, he could hear faint sounds from the other side, Elara speaking with other mages, the worried murmurs of Oakhaven villagers, the distant chant of priests. "Leo, you must rest," Elara said, her tone edged with concern. "Your vital signs are deteriorating. We can monitor the remaining instabilities for a few hours." "How can you see my vital signs?" Leo asked, wiping blood from his lip. "The app transmits more than data. It creates a bridge between your reality and ours. We can sense your life force fading with each edit." He wanted to stop, to collapse onto his bed and sleep for days. But the map still showed 3 major red zones, a thermal inversion causing unseasonal frost in southern farmlands, a magnetic field fluctuation disrupting communication spells, and a subtle time dilation effect near a mountain pass. Each was a ticking bomb, a consequence of his careless taps that he now had to defuse. He was working on the thermal inversion when the first attack came. A new portal ripped open on the map, not near Oakhaven but 50 miles to the west, over a village called Riverbend. Through the observational window, Leo saw armored figures pouring through, spectral soldiers with ethereal weapons, led by a towering figure in black plate mail radiating divine fury. The war god Kale. He had broken the truce. "Elara!" Leo shouted. "They're attacking." "I see it," Elara replied, her voice tight. "Kale has rallied rebel gods who refuse to accept the truce. They believe destroying you is the only way to restore magic fully." The war god's forces moved with terrifying efficiency. They surrounded Riverbend, cutting off escape routes. Flames erupted from thatched roofs as spectral archers fired arrows of divine fire. Villagers screamed, running through muddy streets only to be herded into the central square by phalanxes of ghostly infantry. Leo watched, helpless. His divine energy was still at 3. His body felt like a wrung-out rag. He had nothing left to fight with. Then Kale himself stepped forward. The war god was massive, 7 feet tall with a horned helmet and a great sword that shimmered with captured starlight. He raised his voice, and it boomed across the village, transmitted through the app's audio feed. "False god of physics." Kale roared. "We know you watch. Show yourself, or this village burns. Surrender your divine tool, and we will spare these mortals. Refuse, and we will demonstrate what true divine wrath looks like." On the screen, Leo saw the villagers, men, women, children, cowering in the square. A young boy clutched his mother's skirts. An old man knelt, praying to gods who were no longer listening. The war god soldiers leveled their weapons. Elara's voice cut through. "Leo, do not engage. This is a trap. If you use the app to intervene, you'll drain the last of your life force. And if you surrender the phone, we lose any chance of stabilizing the physics overwrites." "But they'll die," Leo whispered. "They will die if you act recklessly too. We are mobilizing mages, but it will take time. You must." Her voice cut off as Kale gestured. A spectral soldier dragged a village elder forward, a woman with silver hair and a lined face, her hands bound. The war god placed his sword at her throat. "Your choice, false god," Kale said, his eyes seeming to stare directly through the screen at Leo. "The tool or their lives. You have until dawn." The portal shimmered, and the connection to Riverbend stabilized into a grim tableau, a captured village, a hostage elder, and an army of rebel gods waiting for his answer. Leo's phone screen reflected in his wide, exhausted eyes. The red zones of instability still pulsed on the map, but now they were overshadowed by this new, immediate threat. His hands shook, not from fatigue alone, but from the weight of a decision he never asked for. The notification pulsed on Leo's phone screen, a stark red rectangle against the pre-dawn darkness of his dorm room. "Critical alert, hostage situation at Riverbend Village. War god Kale demands surrender of divine artifact within 2 hours." Below the text, a live feed showed flickering torchlight illuminating terrified faces, farmers, children, elders, herded into the village square by armored figures whose weapons glowed with crimson magic. Leo's fingers trembled as he scrolled through the data stream. The Deus Ex Machina interface displayed real-time physics readings from the village: atmospheric pressure normal, gravity stable at 9.8 meters per square second, thermal energy signature spiking around the captor's magical barriers. This wasn't game data. These were people. Marta from Oakhaven had cousins in Riverbend. Alden's apprentice had married a Riverbend blacksmith's daughter last spring. Leo remembered the wedding feast blueprint he'd sketched for them, simple trestle tables, efficient serving layouts. Now those same people were hostages. He slumped against his desk, the wood cold against his bare arms. The clock on his phone read 4:17 a.m. Outside his window, the university campus slept, unaware that a physics student held the fate of a medieval village in his hands. His body still ached from yesterday's stabilization efforts, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that made his vision swim when he stood too quickly. The nosebleed from correcting the moon's orbit had left rusty stains on his shirt collar. Divine energy remained locked at 3/100, the regeneration timer counting down from 92 hours. No magical reserves. Only whatever life force his mortal body could spare. Elara to Leo. The message appeared in the communication log. Chaos Forces number 30, all battle mages sworn to the war god. Their magic disrupts local reality, fire spells burn hotter than physics allows, ice conjurations ignore latent heat principles. My allies approach from the east, but we cannot reach Riverbend before dawn. The village will burn if we assault directly. Leo typed back, his thumbs clumsy with fatigue. Options? You could manipulate gravity again. Crush them. He stared at the words. Last week, that suggestion would have been a game mechanic, adjust sliders, watch pixelated enemies flatten. Now he imagined bones snapping, bodies compressed into meaty pulp. The physics equations danced behind his eyes, F equals G, m2/r superscript 2, the gravitational constant, mass calculations. He could do it. With the reality editor, he could increase local gravity 50-fold, 100-fold. But the collateral damage, buildings collapsing, the very ground buckling. And the energy cost would kill him. Literally drain the life from his cells until his heart stopped. No permanent changes, he typed. No killing if avoidable. Elara's response came slowly, as if weighing each word. Then thermodynamics. Create a thermal barrier. Isolate the village from Kale's fire magic. But Leo, this will require precise, sustained manipulation. Without divine energy, your body will pay the price. Leo opened the reality editor. The interface glowed softly, familiar menus listing physics variables he'd studied for years, thermal conductivity, specific heat capacity, blackbody radiation curves. He pulled up Riverbend's environmental data. Average temperature, 12 degrees Celsius. Humidity, 78%. Wind patterns from the northwest at 8 km per hour, Kale's mage's fire spells registered at 1,200 degrees Celsius, impossible temperatures that should have consumed all available oxygen instantly, but magic cheated, bending reality to its will. He could cheat back. His plan formed in fragments, each piece a physics principle. First, manipulate air density around the village perimeter, increase it gradually to create an invisible wall of compressed atmosphere. Second, alter thermal conductivity properties so heat couldn't transfer across the barrier. Third, maintain the barrier long enough for Elara's forces to arrive. Simple in theory. Catastrophic in practice. Leo's hands shook as he adjusted the first slider. Atmospheric density, plus 300% within 50-meter radius of village boundary. The reality editor calculated the energy cost, 8 DE. He had 3. The difference would come from him. He took a deep breath, the air tasting of dorm room dust and stale coffee. Execute. The change happened instantly in Riverbend. Villagers gasped as the air thickened, becoming syrupy and hard to breathe. Torch flames guttered, their light diffusing through suddenly dense atmosphere. Kale's mages stumbled, their chants faltering as sound waves distorted in the heavy air. On Leo's phone, his vitality meter, a feature he'd never noticed before, dropped from 100% to 87%. A wave of dizziness hit him, his vision tunneling. He gripped the desk edge, knuckles white. Second adjustment. Thermal conductivity, minus 95% across barrier interface. Energy cost, 12 DE. Vitality dropped to 71%. Leo's nose began bleeding again, warm droplets splattering on his keyboard. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat feeling strained, as if his blood had turned to molasses. In Riverbend, the thermal barrier manifested as a shimmer in the air, a heat haze ring surrounding the village. When Kale's lead mage hurled a fireball at a thatched roof, the flames hit the invisible wall and dissipated, their energy bleeding away into the atmosphere instead of transferring to the flammable material. The mage stared, then cast again. Same result. The fire god's magic, which had burned cities and melted stone, now fizzled against physics made manifest. It's working, Elara's message flashed. But Leo, your vital signs. He didn't read the rest. Third adjustment, the hardest one. Maintain barrier stability for 45 minutes. Not a single edit but a continuous expenditure. The reality editor displayed the cost, 1 DE per minute. 45 DE total. His vitality meter plummeted, 71%. 63%. 55%. Leo's world narrowed to his phone screen and the agony spreading through his body. Each percentage point of vitality lost felt like a piece of his soul being carved away. At 48%, his ears began ringing, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the dorm's nighttime sounds. At 41%, his fingers went numb, and he had to prop the phone against his textbook to keep typing. At 33%, cold sweat soaked through his shirt despite no fever, his body's thermoregulation failing as energy diverted to sustain the barrier. In Riverbend, dawn's first light revealed the miracle. The thermal barrier held, a perfect dome of shimmering air that contained Kale's mages and their hostages but allowed villagers to breathe, if laboriously. Children stared upward, pointing at rainbows of refracted light dancing across the barrier's surface. Elders whispered prayers not to gods but to the unseen force protecting them. Then Kale arrived. The war god manifested in a blast of crimson energy that shook the ground even through the physics barrier. He stood 7 feet tall, armored in black plate that drank the dawn light, a great sword crackling with reality-tearing magic in his hands. He surveyed the barrier, then laughed, a sound like grinding stones. Clever, Kale's voice boomed through the communication feed. But physics has limits. Magic does not. The war god raised his sword. Reality around the blade warped, space itself bending as Kale channeled divine power. He struck the barrier. The impact registered on Leo's phone as a massive energy spike. The thermal conductivity variables fluctuated wildly. The barrier held, but just barely. Leo's vitality dropped to 27% in a single heartbeat. He cried out, a raw sound torn from his throat as pain lanced through every nerve ending. Blood trickled from both nostrils now, dripping in steady rivulets onto his lap. Elara, where are you? He typed with trembling fingers. Approaching. 2 minutes. Hold, Leo. Kale struck again. This time the barrier flickered, a visible ripple passing through the shimmering air. In Riverbend, villagers screamed as the air pressure suddenly dropped, then spiked. Leo's vitality, 19%. His vision blurred, the phone screen doubling, tripling. He could barely make out the numbers. His body felt hollowed out, a shell draining dry. He heard the battle before he saw it on the feed, the clash of steel, shouted spells, the roar of a water goddess's tidal wave as Aquaria joined the fight. Elara's forces had arrived. Mages in blue robes dueled Kale's battle mages, their spells colliding in bursts of light and sound. Aquaria stood back to back with a star god whose form shifted between constellations, together holding off Kale's personal guard. But Kale himself focused on the barrier. He knew its source. Knew that breaking it meant breaking Leo. Third strike. The war god channeled all his power, his sword glowing white-hot with concentrated reality disruption. He brought it down in an overhead arc aimed not at the barrier's surface but at its quantum foundation, at the very laws of thermodynamics holding it together. Leo's phone buzzed violently in his hand. Warning, barrier integrity at 23%. Sustained expenditure exceeding safe thresholds. Vitality critical, 11%. The numbers flashed red. 10%. 9%. He had to hold. Just a little longer. Elara was fighting her way toward Kale. Aquaria had pinned 2 battle mages against a cottage wall with a wall of ice. The star god had wrapped Kale in chains of starlight, slowing his next strike. 8%. Leo's breathing came in ragged gasps. Each inhalation felt like drawing broken glass into his lungs. The dorm room swam around him, colors bleeding together. He couldn't feel his legs. 7%. Kale broke free of the starlight chains, his sword rising again. 6%. Elara reached the war god, her staff glowing with containment magic. 5%. The barrier flickered, its shimmer fading to transparency. Then the phone died. The screen went black. Not a gradual fade, but instant, absolute darkness. The low battery warning hadn't even flashed, the sustained energy drain from the reality editor, combined with Leo's own life force bleeding into the device, had consumed the last of the battery in a final surge. "No," Leo whispered, his voice a dry rasp. He fumbled for the charger, his numb fingers refusing to grip the cable. It slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. He tried to stand, to reach it, but his legs buckled. He collapsed beside his desk, his head striking the edge on the way down. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the black screen of his phone, reflecting the pale dawn light through his window. Somewhere in another world, a thermal barrier sustained by his dying energy either held or shattered. He would never know which. Leo lay on the cold linoleum floor, unconscious, blood pooling beneath his face from nose and a new cut on his forehead. His breathing grew shallow, each exhale a faint mist in the chilly room. The Deus Ex Machina app, disconnected from its power source, slept in the phone's memory. In Riverbend, the fate of a village hung suspended between physics and magic, between a war god's rage and a student's sacrifice. And the dawn, indifferent to both worlds, continued to brighten. Leo's consciousness returned in fragments, like shards of glass reassembling themselves. First came the taste of copper in his mouth, dried blood caking his lips. Then the dull ache in his temples, pulsing with every heartbeat. Finally, the cold press of linoleum against his cheek, the gritty texture of dust sticking to his skin. He opened his eyes to the dim light of his dorm room, the digital clock on his desk blinking 4:17 a.m. He'd been out for hours. His body protested as he pushed himself up, muscles trembling with the effort. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and he braced himself against his desk, knuckles white. The room spun briefly before settling. He glanced at his hands, pale, almost translucent skin, blue veins visible beneath the surface. Dark smudges of dried blood stained his shirt collar where his nose had bled. His vitality felt like a shallow pool, barely enough to keep him upright. His phone lay on the floor, screen dark. The battery had died during the barrier creation. Leo fumbled for the charger cable, fingers clumsy as he plugged it in. The screen flickered to life, showing the charging symbol. He waited, each second stretching into an eternity, his mind racing back to Riverbend. Had the barrier held? Were the villagers safe? What had happened after he collapsed? When the phone reached 5%, he unlocked it. The Deus Ex Machina app icon glowed faintly. He tapped it, and the interface loaded, the familiar grid of the reality editor, the energy bar still locked at 3/100 divine energy, the regeneration timer counting down from 112 hours. But the world view was different. Instead of the peaceful village scene from before, Riverbend appeared in chaos. Through the app's visual feed, Leo saw the thermal barrier he'd created, a shimmering, translucent dome of distorted air surrounding the village. But it was failing. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, glowing with residual heat. Beyond it, Kale's forces had regrouped. Dozens of armored soldiers, their armor etched with fiery runes, stood in formation. Mages in crimson robes channeled spells, bolts of fire and lightning striking the barrier, each impact causing another fracture. The village buildings inside smoldered, some roofs collapsed and villagers huddled in the central square, their faces etched with terror. Archmage Alara stood at the barrier's edge, her staff raised, blue magical energy flowing from her to reinforce the weakening dome. Beside her, Aquaria, the water goddess, hovered in a misty form, her hands weaving watery shields that evaporated under the heat. A star god, a being of swirling constellations, floated nearby, casting starlight barriers that flickered uncertainly. They were holding, but barely. Kale himself stood at the forefront, a towering figure in black armor, a great sword wreathed in flames. He shouted commands, his voice a rumble that vibrated through the app's audio feed. "Surrender the tool, or watch this village burn to ash." Kale roared. "Your barrier cannot last forever." Leo's breath caught. He had to do something. But with only 3 divine energy and his vitality already drained to near zero, what could he manage? The reality editor's variables glowed on screen: gravity, atmospheric pressure, thermodynamics, electromagnetism, orbital mechanics. He scanned them, mind racing. Thermodynamics was already maxed out with the barrier, tweaking it further might collapse it entirely. Gravity shifts could cause structural damage. But electromagnetism. He remembered a lecture from his physics class, how lightning formed from charge imbalances in clouds, how electromagnetic fields could be manipulated to direct energy. If he could rewrite the local electromagnetic fields around Riverbend. His fingers hovered over the screen. The app warned him, warning, electromagnetic field manipulation requires significant energy expenditure. Current divine energy insufficient. Would you like to use personal vitality as fuel? Leo didn't hesitate. He tapped yes. A searing pain shot through his body, starting at his fingertips and radiating inward. It felt like his veins were filling with molten lead. He gasped, doubling over, sweat beading on his forehead. The app displayed his vitality dropping, 5%. 4%. 3%. He pushed through, focusing on the electromagnetic field variables. He increased the charge differential in the atmosphere above Riverbend by 500%, creating a massive potential difference. Then he manipulated the field lines, directing them toward Kale's forces. The sky darkened, clouds swirling into a vortex. Static electricity crackled in the air, making the hairs on Leo's arms stand up even through the screen. In Riverbend, the change was immediate. The barrier flickered as the electromagnetic interference disrupted the thermal energy. Elara stumbled back, her staff sputtering. Aquaria's misty form condensed into droplets. Kale looked up, his fiery aura dimming slightly. "What is this?" he growled. Leo didn't stop. He tweaked the field further, increasing the ionization rate. Lightning began to form, first as faint streaks in the clouds, then as jagged bolts arcing downward. One struck near Kale's front line, exploding the ground in a shower of dirt and rock. Soldiers scattered, their formations breaking. But the energy cost was immense. Leo's vitality dropped to 2%. His vision blurred, edges darkening. Blood trickled from his nose again, warm and salty. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, each thump a laborious effort. He gripped the phone tighter, knuckles bone white. On screen, Kale rallied his mages. "Focus your spells. Disrupt the field." The crimson-robed mages chanted in unison, red energy lancing upward, trying to counter the electromagnetic changes. Leo saw the field variables fluctuating, his control slipping. He had to act fast. With a final, desperate effort, he maxed out the charge differential, creating a supercell storm directly above Kale's position. The app warned, critical vitality levels detected. "Continue." Leo tapped yes. The pain became unbearable. It felt like his bones were splintering, his organs shutting down. His vitality hit 1%. The world narrowed to the phone screen, the glowing variables, the storm forming. In Riverbend, the sky tore open. A massive lightning bolt, thicker than a tree trunk, slammed down into the center of Kale's forces. The impact was deafening, a thunderclap that shook the ground. Light flashed, blinding white. When it cleared, Kale's armor was scorched black, cracks running through it. His greatsword lay shattered on the ground, the flames extinguished. Around him, his soldiers and mages were thrown back, many unconscious, their magical auras snuffed out. Kale staggered, then fell to one knee. He looked up, his fiery eyes dimming. "How?" Elara seized the moment. She raised her staff, blue energy wrapping around Kale, binding him in magical chains. Aquaria added watery restraints, freezing them solid. The star god cast a starlight prison, sealing Kale in a cage of light. The remaining forces, leaderless, began to retreat, scrambling away from the village. The barrier, no longer under sustained attack, stabilized, its cracks slowly sealing. Leo watched it all through blurring vision. His body felt weightless, detached. The phone slipped from his fingers, clattering to the desk. He tried to catch it, but his arms wouldn't respond. He slumped forward, forehead hitting the desk with a dull thud. Darkness crept in from the edges, swallowing his consciousness. The last thing he saw was the app screen, showing Kale captured, the village safe, and his vitality at 0.5%. In Riverbend, the pantheon gathered around Kale's prison. Elara, Aquaria, and the star god hovered near the barrier, their forms shimmering with residual magic. They watched as villagers emerged from hiding, tending to the wounded, assessing the damage. "He did it," Elara said, her voice weary. "But at what cost?" Aquaria's misty form rippled. "I felt his energy, it was not divine. It was mortal, finite. He was burning himself out to power those changes." The star god's constellation eyes glowed thoughtfully. "A mortal with the power to rewrite physics. But he is not invincible. Look, his influence wanes. The electromagnetic field is returning to normal without his constant input." Elara nodded. "He has limits. Severe ones. If we press him, he might break entirely. Aquaria frowned. Or we could accept this new balance. His physics, our magic, they can coexist. He has shown restraint, fixing what he broke. The star god shifted, stars swirling. But can we trust him? What if he loses control again? Or what if another mortal gains such power? They fell silent, watching the village. The dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the dissipating storm clouds. The barrier faded entirely, leaving only the scarred landscape and the captured war god. In the distance, the pantheon's other members began to arrive, gods of earth, air, and more, drawn by the conflict. They gathered, their auras clashing, voices rising in debate. He is weakened, one said. Now is the time to strike, to take the tool and restore pure magic. No, another countered. He has saved innocence. He has offered truce. We would be fools to reject this chance. The argument swirled, growing heated. Elara stepped forward, her staff glowing. Enough. We will decide together. But remember, he is watching. And he is not as powerless as he seems. In his dorm room, Leo lay unconscious, breath shallow, blood drying on his face. The phone screen went dark again, battery drained. But the app's connection held, a faint thread linking him to that world. And in the silence, the debate raged on, gods and mages deciding the fate of a physics student who had unwittingly become their god. Leo's vision swam in and out of focus, the world reduced to a blur of pain and exhaustion. He lay slumped against his dorm room wall, the cold floor biting through his jeans. Every breath was a ragged, shallow thing that scraped at his lungs. His head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, and the metallic taste of blood lingered in his mouth from the nosebleeds that had stained his shirt. The phone in his trembling hand felt impossibly heavy, its screen glowing with the Deus Ex Machina interface, the thermal barrier around Riverbend village flickering erratically in the display, its stability degrading by the second. He could see the tiny figures on the screen, Archmage Elara and the water goddess Aquaria standing over the captured war god Kale, whose magical bindings shimmered with residual energy. A star god hovered nearby, its celestial form a swirl of light and shadow. The pantheon had gathered in the aftermath of the battle, their divine auras clashing and mingling in the village square. Leo's eyes struggled to focus on the details, the cracked cobblestones, the scorch marks from Kale's fire magic, the wary faces of Riverbend villagers peering from doorways. His own reflection in the dark dorm window showed a pale, hollow-eyed stranger, dark circles under his eyes and dried blood smeared across his chin. I can't hold this, Leo whispered to himself, his voice a raw croak. The thermal barrier's energy drain was a constant, gnawing pressure in his chest, like a vice tightening around his ribs. His vitality readout on the app's corner hovered at 0.5%, a stark red warning that pulsed with each heartbeat. The divine energy counter remained locked at 3 out of 100, its regeneration function grayed out and unresponsive. He'd pushed too far, used his own life force as fuel, and now he was paying the price. Every minor adjustment to the barrier's thermodynamics, a tweak to atmospheric density here, a correction to thermal conductivity there, sent fresh waves of dizziness through him. His fingers trembled as they hovered over the touchscreen, threatening to slip. On the screen, Elara looked up, her sage's robes billowing in an unnatural wind. Her expression was a mix of concern and urgency, her eyes seeming to pierce through the digital divide. Leo had learned to read her subtle cues over their brief, strained alliance. The slight furrow of her brow meant she sensed the barrier's instability. Through the app's communication function, her voice crackled into his ear, tinny and distant but clear. Leo, the pantheon is assembled. They demand answers. Your interventions have left reality frayed at the edges. We must speak now, before more rebel gods rally to Kale's cause. Leo swallowed, his throat dry and sore. He tapped the reply icon, his movements sluggish. I'm listening. But I'm running on fumes here, Elara. One wrong move and this whole thing collapses. He could feel the weight of the pantheon's gaze through the screen, a collective, divine pressure that made the air in his dorm feel thick and charged. Aquaria's watery form shimmered with restrained power, while the star god's light cast long, shifting shadows across the village. Brother Kalen, the priest from Oakhaven, stood at the edge of the gathering, his hands clasped in prayer, his face etched with confusion and fear. Marta, the village elder, hovered nearby, her eyes wide as she watched the deities debate. Elara's voice came again, softer this time. They know you're mortal now, Leo. They saw you bleed, saw you weaken. Some among them, the more traditional gods, argue this is the time to strike, to sever your connection permanently before you rewrite more of their domains. Others, like Aquaria and the star gods, see the value in stability. Your physics patches have stopped magical failures that plagued us for weeks. But they need assurance. A treaty. Leo closed his eyes for a moment, the pain behind his eyelids a sharp, stabbing sensation. He thought of the villagers, Alden the blacksmith crafting that flintlock musket from his blueprint, Master Torrens' failed reinforcement spells, the drought-stricken fields he tried to help. He'd started this as a game, a way to unwind from physics equations and deadlines. Now, real people's lives hung in the balance, and his casual taps had rewritten their world's laws. The cosmic horror of it settled in his gut, a cold, heavy realization that he'd been playing God without knowing the stakes. "I have a proposal," Leo said, forcing the words out. He opened his eyes, focusing on the screen. "I'll use physics to support magic, not replace it. A hybrid system. The reality editor can set up automated patches, basic laws of gravity, thermodynamics, electromagnetism, that run in the background. No more direct overwrites. No more disrupting divine domains. It'll stabilize reality without my constant input. But it'll cost me almost everything I have left." He didn't specify what everything meant, the last dregs of his vitality, the final shreds of his connection to the app. Elara relayed the offer to the pantheon. Leo watched as the deities conferred, their auras flaring with argument. Aquaria's watery form rippled in what might have been agreement, while a lesser god, one he didn't recognize, with armor of molten rock, gestured angrily. The star god's light dimmed thoughtfully. After what felt like an eternity, Elara nodded. "They agree, Leo. But they want it done now. And they want your word that you'll retire the tool. No more playing." Leo's heart clenched at the word playing. It sounded so trivial, so insulting to the chaos he'd caused. But it was the truth, he'd treated their world as a casual mobile game. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the air tasting of dust and blood. "Okay. One final edit." His fingers moved over the screen, slow and deliberate. He opened the reality editor, its interface glowing with complex variables and sliders. Gravity coefficients, atmospheric pressure gradients, electromagnetic field strengths, all the parameters he'd tweaked in his ignorant bliss. Now, he set them to stable, self-sustaining values. He created automated routines. If local gravity fluctuated beyond a 0.5% threshold, a background process would gently correct it. If thermal conductivity spiked, a damping algorithm would engage. Each setup drained him further. His vitality dropped from 0.5% to 0.2%, then 0.1%. His vision tunneled, the edges going dark. A fresh nosebleed started, warm blood trickling down his lip. His hands grew numb, the phone slipping in his grip. He could feel the changes ripple through the app's connection. On the screen, Riverbend village stabilized, the thermal barrier solidified into a permanent, low-energy field, the air shimmering with a faint, scientific sheen. The pantheon's auras calmed, the chaotic magical energies settling into a new, orderly pattern. Elara let out a soft sigh of relief, her shoulders slumping. Aquaria's form stilled, her hydrological spells flowing smoothly again. The star god's light brightened, its astrological magic no longer frayed by orbital tweaks. "It's done," Leo gasped, his voice barely audible. He could barely hold the phone now, his arms trembling with exhaustion. "The patches are live. Reality should stay stable. No more direct edits from me." Elara's face filled the screen, her expression unreadable, a mix of gratitude, sorrow, and resignation. "Thank you, Leo. You've given us a chance at balance. But this means, we won't speak again. The connection must be severed, for everyone's safety." Leo nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He hadn't expected to care about these people, these characters in a game that wasn't a game. But he did. He'd seen their fear, their resilience, their world teetering on the edge because of him. "Take care of them, Elara. Tell Alden his musket design was innovative. Tell Marta the farmlands should recover. And Aquaria. I'm sorry about the rain." Elara smiled faintly, a rare, genuine expression. "I will. Farewell, god of physics." The screen went dark for a moment, then lit up with a final notification. Leo's eyes, bleary and unfocused, struggled to read it, connection severed. Reality stabilized. "Thank you for playing, god of physics. The words were crisp, white text against a black background, devoid of any game-like flourishes. They felt final, absolute. Leo let the phone drop from his numb fingers. It clattered to the floor, the screen cracking slightly. He didn't have the energy to pick it up. He slumped further against the wall, his body a wreck of pain and exhaustion. But as he sat there, breathing shallowly in the dim dorm light, he felt something else, a strange, permanent drain, as if a part of him had been torn away and left in that other world. It wasn't physical pain, not exactly. It was a hollow ache in his chest, a lingering connection that thrummed with the faint echo of stabilized physics laws. He'd retired the app, but the cost was etched into his very being. He closed his eyes, the darkness swallowing him, and wondered if he'd ever feel whole again. Leo woke to the sound of rain tapping against his dorm room window, a gentle rhythm that felt both familiar and alien. 3 weeks had passed since he'd severed the connection, and his body still carried the echoes of that final expenditure. He sat up slowly, the movement requiring more effort than it should have for a 20-year-old physics student. His limbs felt heavy, as if gravity had been personally recalibrated to weigh more heavily on his bones. Sunlight filtered through the gray clouds outside, casting pale rectangles across his cluttered desk. Textbooks on quantum mechanics and thermodynamics lay stacked beside empty energy drink cans and a half-finished problem set. His phone sat face down, silent and dark. Leo reached for it, his fingers trembling slightly, a remnant of the physical deterioration that had brought him to the brink. He turned it over, the screen reflecting his tired face. Dark circles hung under his eyes, and his skin had taken on a pallor that hadn't existed before his encounters with the Deus Ex Machina app. He opened his app drawer, scrolling past games and social media until he found the icon, a stylized gear floating in a celestial background. Deus Ex Machina. His thumb hovered over it for a long moment, remembering the thermal barrier around Riverbend, the lightning storm that had disabled Kale's armies, the final negotiation that had drained him to near nothing. With a decisive tap, he selected Uninstall. A confirmation dialog appeared, "Are you sure? All saved data will be lost." Leo didn't hesitate. He tapped Yes, and the icon vanished from his screen. A strange emptiness settled in his chest, not just the absence of the app, but something deeper. Part of him, he knew, remained tethered to that other world. The notification had said as much when he'd severed the connection, permanent link established. Residual divine essence retained. Whatever that meant, he felt it in his dreams. Every night since, he'd dreamed of Oakhaven. Not as the pixelated village from the app, but as a living, breathing place. He saw Marta, the village elder, teaching children about levers and pulleys alongside traditional prayers to Aquaria. He saw Alden the blacksmith incorporating aerodynamic principles into dragon-scale armor designs. He saw Brother Kalen, priest of Aquaria, using basic fluid dynamics to enhance his water blessings. The dreams were vivid, tactile, he could smell the wood smoke, feel the texture of stone walls, hear the blend of incantations and scientific explanations. Leo stood, his legs unsteady for the first few steps. He made his way to the small mirror above his sink. The face staring back was his, but changed. The vitality drain had left permanent marks, a slight gauntness to his cheeks, a fragility in his posture that hadn't been there before. He touched his temple where the nosebleeds had been worst, half expecting to find blood, but finding only smooth skin. The physical damage had healed, but the essence of it remained, a constitutional weakness that doctors couldn't explain. Stress and exhaustion, they'd said after his collapse. Take it easy. He couldn't take it easy. Not with what he knew. Opening his thermodynamics textbook, Leo found himself reading the equations with new eyes. Before, they'd been abstract concepts, mathematical models of reality. Now, he saw Riverbend's thermal barrier in every heat transfer formula. He saw the atmospheric density manipulation in the ideal gas law. The physics had become personal, visceral. He began working through problems with an intensity that surprised even him. Where he'd once struggled with the practical applications, he now understood them on an intuitive level. He'd literally rewritten atmospheric pressure. How could Bernoulli's principle ever feel abstract again? His professor noticed the change. "Mr. Chen," Dr. Alastair said after class one afternoon, adjusting his glasses as he examined Leo's latest problem set. "This solution to the Carnot cycle optimization, it's innovative. Unconventional. Where did this approach come from?" Leo hesitated, his mind flashing to the reality editor's interface. "I thought about real-world constraints," he said carefully. "What if you couldn't rely on perfect conditions? What if you had to work with limited energy? Limited energy, Dr. Alastair repeated, tapping the paper. Yes. That's exactly what makes this compelling. You've accounted for systemic losses I wouldn't expect an undergraduate to consider. Leo managed a weak smile. If only his professor knew how intimately he understood systemic losses, how each edit had drained not just divine energy, but his own life force. Meanwhile, in a world Leo could now only visit in dreams, Archmage Elara stood on the observation platform of the newly constructed Convergent Spire. The structure rose from what had once been a contested border between magical and scientific anomalies, now a place of study and integration. Below her, the landscape of the transformed realm unfolded. Report, Elara said, her voice carrying the weight of her position but lacking its former tension. Corin, her junior mage, stepped forward with a crystalline data slate. The hybrid systems remain stable, Archmage. Gravity normalization protocols are functioning at 98% efficiency, the 2% variance allows for localized magical flight without disrupting planetary orbit. Elara nodded, watching as a dragon, a great bronze-scaled beast named Ignarius, circled the spire. Its flight pattern had changed since Leo's interventions. Before, it had flown on pure magical levitation, defying aerodynamic principles. Now, its wings caught the air with calculated precision, using thermal updrafts and minimizing drag. Magic still supplemented its flight, but the foundation was physics. And the pantheon? Elara asked. Aquaria reports that her hydrological domains have stabilized, Corin said, scrolling through the slate. The automated background patches Leo established maintain water cycles without overriding her ceremonial magic. She's appreciative. As appreciative as a water goddess can be. And the star gods? They've recalibrated their astrological magic to account for the orbital edits. The constellations still hold power, but now their influences follow predictable celestial mechanics. Corin hesitated. Some remain wary. The war gods faction, those who followed Kale, they whisper about the god of physics returning. Elara's expression tightened. Leo is gone. The connection is severed. Is it? Corin asked quietly. We still feel echoes. The laws he established, they carry a signature. Not divine, not magical, but something else. In Oakhaven, Marta stood before the village council, a chalkboard behind her covered in diagrams. The irrigation system, she explained, pointing to a schematic that blended magical runes with mechanical pumps. Using Aquaria's blessing to purify the water, but the pressure differentials from Leo's designs to distribute it efficiently. Brother Kalen watched from the back, his priestly robes looking oddly natural beside the scientific instruments that now adorned the temple. The people are adapting, he said to Master Torin, the local mage. Better than we feared. Torin nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of a reinforcement spell matrix. My magic works differently now. Not weaker, more reliable. The physics provide a foundation instead of fighting against it. He paused. Do you think he knows what he did for us? He sacrificed, Kalen said simply. Whether he understood the full cost or not, he paid it. Back in his dorm, Leo finished his problem set as evening deepened into night. He'd excelled on every exam since his return, his grades climbing from mediocre to exceptional. His professors talked about graduate school recommendations, research opportunities. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt like an imposter. He stood at his window, watching the rain. Normal rain, falling at normal velocity, with normal atmospheric pressure. No edits. No divine energy expenditure. Just water obeying the laws of physics, the real laws, the ones that had always existed in his world. What had he been in that other world? A god? A vandal? A well-intentioned meddler? He'd brought chaos, disrupted magic, angered deities, nearly caused a cosmic war. But he'd also brought order, stabilized reality, created systems that allowed magic and science to coexist, saved villages from drought and destruction. He'd been an unwitting deity. A physics student playing a game that turned out to be real. The thought should have felt absurd, but after what he'd experienced, the vitality drain, the dreams, the permanent weakness in his limbs, it felt like the only truth that mattered. The room darkened as clouds thickened outside. Leo turned from the window, ready to prepare for another night of dreams about a world he could never revisit. Then his phone lit up. Not with a notification he recognized. Not a text message, not an app update, not an email. The screen glowed with a soft, pulsating light that seemed to originate from within the device itself, casting eerie shadows across his desk. Leo approached slowly, his heart beginning to pound in a rhythm that felt both fearful and familiar. He picked up the phone. The message filled the screen, written in clean, sans serif font against a background of shifting cosmic patterns. The Reality Editor version 2.0 available for download. New features, multi-world support. Continue your journey. Below the text were two options, install and ignore. Leo stared, his breath catching in his throat. The phone shouldn't be doing this. He'd uninstalled the app. He'd severed the connection. He'd paid the price with his vitality, with part of his very being. But the screen continued to glow, the cosmic patterns swirling slowly, hypnotically. Multi-world support. What did that mean? Other realms? Other realities? Other places where his taps could rewrite laws? His thumb hovered over the screen, trembling not from weakness now, but from conflict. Curiosity warred with fear in his chest, the same curiosity that had made him download the original app, the same fear that had nearly killed him. The phone's light reflected in his eyes, twin points of cosmic glow in the darkening room. Outside, the rain fell, obeying laws he hadn't written. Inside, a choice glowed on a screen that shouldn't exist. He didn't tap either option. Not yet. He just stood there, holding the device that had changed everything, watching as the message pulsed with patient, ominous light.